своей парадной военной форме я стою на свадьбе моей сестры Эмили, наблюдая, как она живет идеальной жизнью, за которую я, возможно, сама заплатила. Она не догадывается, что я оплатила половину этой свадьбы. Ей невдомек, что я ее вырастила, пока наши родители постоянно ссорились. Она даже не знает о моей настоящей работе. Когда она меня видит, ее лицо искажается в знакомой гримасе презрения. «Так значит, Ванесса, все еще перекладываешь бумажки за каким-то столом?» произносит она достаточно громко, чтобы услышал весь стол. Все смеются. Я – излюбленная семейная шутка. Незамужняя старшая сестра, которой 36, и она совсем одна. Я улыбаюсь. «Вообще-то, Эмили, я летаю на вертолетах. Боевое спасение». Она закатывает глаза, опьяненная шампанским и вниманием. «О, ну да. А как тогда твой позывной, крутая девчонка?» «Железная вдова». Вся комната продолжает болтать, но ее жених Итан, морской котик, которого я никогда не видела, замирает. С его лица сходит краска. Он смотрит на меня, словно увидел призрака. Затем он встает, подходит к Эмили и совершает нечто, заставляющее весь прием замереть. «Извинись», — произносит он голосом, холодным как смерть. «Немедленно, потому что Итан прекрасно знает, кто такая железная вдова. Он знает, что я сделала 8 лет назад в Афганистане. Он знает долг, который он мне должен. Долг, который напрямую связан с его братом, секретной миссией и женщиной, которая влетела в ад, чтобы вернуть его команду домой. Это история о том, как идеальная свадьба моей сестры стала днем, когда весь ее мир рухнул, и как мужчина, на котором она вышла замуж, выбрал меня, а не ее, не произнеся ни единого слова. Задержитесь со мной, потому что то, что произойдет дальше, разрушит все. Мое имя Ванесса Митчелл. Мне 36 лет, я бывший пилот армейского вертолета, которая провела 15 лет, выполняя боевые спасательные миссии в местах, которые большинство людей даже не могут найти на карте. Я спасала жизни, вытаскивала раненых солдат из ада, пока пули звенели по моему вертолету. Теперь я работаю в частной медицинской транспортной компании, перевозя донорские органы и тяжелобольных пациентов между больницами. Это более спокойная работа, но она все равно важна. По крайней мере, так я говорю себе в те дни, когда задаюсь вопросом, замечает ли кто-нибудь вообще то, что я делаю. Сегодня, стоя перед позолоченными дверями отеля Riverside Grand, наблюдая, как моя младшая сестра Эмили выходит замуж за мужчину, которого я никогда не встречала, мне в очередной раз напоминают, что в моей семье я всегда была невидима. В тот момент, когда я вхожу в банкетный зал, я понимаю, что мне здесь не место. Место проведения будто сошло со страниц журнала. Хрустальные люстры ловят послеполуденный свет. Каскады слоновой кости роз свисают с каждой поверхности. Столы задрапированы шелком цвета шампанского. Должно быть, 200 гостей заполняют пространство оживленным разговором и смехом. Я узнаю некоторые лица из детства. Дальние тети, друзья семьи, которые перестали спрашивать обо мне годы назад. Но никто не отрывается от своих групп, чтобы поприветствовать меня. Я просто старшая сестра Эмили. Та, которая уехала и приезжает домой только по обязательным поводам, таким как этот. Та, которая выбрала карьеру вместо семьи. По крайней мере, так они всегда предполагали. Я направляюсь к своему столу в дальнем углу, как можно дальше от главного стола, но не на кухне. Работа моей матери, без сомнения. Она посадила меня там, где меня не будет видно на свадебных фотографиях, где я случайно не отвлеку внимание от большого дня Эмили. Я одета в свою армейскую парадную форму не потому, что хочу привлечь внимание, а потому что это единственная официальная одежда, которая у меня есть. После многих лет жизни в вещевых мешках и трат денег на счета родителей и чрезвычайные ситуации Эмили, я так и не удосужилась купить коктейльные платья. Форма все равно кажется правильной, как броня. Она напоминает мне, что я ценна, даже если моя семья забыла об этом. Усаживаясь за стол и принимая бокал шампанского от проходящего официанта, я слышу их. Шепот. Они даже не пытаются быть незаметными. Две женщины за соседним столом, обе в изысканных жемчугах и с осуждением. «Это старшая сестра Эмили, та, что в армии. Как ее там звали?» Другая женщина отвечает. «Ванесса, кажется. Все еще одинока в 36. Должно быть замужем за своей работой. Какое несчастье, она была такой красивой, когда была моложе. Они не знают, что я их слышу. Или, может быть, им все равно?» Я медленно отпиваю шампанское и сохраняю бесстрастное выражение лица. Годы военной дисциплины научили меня скрывать свои чувства, оставаться спокойной, когда люди недооценивают тебя. Правда в том, что их слова задевают, но это не то, чего я не слышала раньше. Моя мать говорит то же самое, только более вежливо. «Ванесса, когда ты остепенишься? Разве ты не хочешь детей, пока не стало слишком поздно? Эмили выходит замуж. Разве это не заставляет тебя чувствовать, что ты что-то упускаешь?» Как будто брак — единственная мера ценности женщины. Как будто я не потратила последние 15 лет на то, чтобы доказать свою ценность способами, которые они никогда не могли понять. Через всю комнату светится Эмили. Она всегда была красивой. Нежные черты лица, длинные светлые волосы, та непринужденная грация, которая заставляет людей хотеть о ней заботиться. Сегодня, в ее облегающем белом платье с длинным шлейфом, она выглядит как принцесса. Наши родители стоят по обе стороны от нее, сияя от гордости. Отец обнимает ее за плечи. Мать вытирает глаза платочком, переполненная радостью. Я смотрю на них и чувствую эту знакомую ноющую пустоту в груди. Когда я окончила летную школу, лучшая в своем классе, мой отец сказал: «Это хорошо, Ванесса», и вернулся к чтению газеты. Когда я получила благодарность за отвагу после эвакуации 6 солдат из зоны активных боевых действий, моя мать спросила, полагается ли к награде повышение зарплаты. Но когда Эмили обручилась с мужчиной, которого знала 8 месяцев, они устроили вечеринку и пригласили всех, кого когда-либо знали. Я не озлоблена. По крайней мере, я говорю себе, что не озлоблена. Эмили и я просто разные. Ей нужны были любовь и внимание наших родителей, чтобы выжить. Я рано поняла, что все придется зарабатывать самой. Это нормально. Я смирилась с этим много лет назад. Или я думала, что смирилась, пока сегодня, сидя одна на этой свадьбе, не увидела, как моя семья созерцает дочь, которую они действительно видят. Затем я чувствую на себе тяжелый и пристальный взгляд. Я поднимаю глаза и обнаруживаю, что он смотрит на меня. Жених, Итан. Я видела его только на фотографиях, которые Эмили публиковала в социальных сетях, улыбающегося рядом с ней на пляжах и в ресторанах, всегда выглядящего ухоженно и уверенно. Вживую он более поразительный. Высокий, широкоплечий, с той силой духа, которая появляется после многих лет военной подготовки. На нем его парадная флотская форма, знаки отличия и вышивка, указывающие на то, что он прошел серьезные боевые действия. «Морской котик», — гордо сообщила мне Эмили по телефону. «Он настоящий герой, Ванесса. Не то что, ты понимаешь». Но сейчас он смотрит не на Эмили, он смотрит на меня. Наши взгляды встречаются через многолюдную комнату, и между нами пробегает что-то, чего я не могу назвать. Это не влечение, хотя он красив. Это не любопытство, хотя мы никогда не встречались. Это что-то более глубокое, более тревожное. Узнавание, как будто он знает меня, хотя я уверена, что мы никогда не пересекались. Его взгляд интенсивный, почти аналитический, как у солдата, оценивающего ситуацию. Я замечаю маленькую татуировку на его запястье, частично видимую из-под манжеты его формы. Трезубец, может быть, или другой военный знак отличия. Я не могу рассмотреть ее с такого расстояния. Момент тянется. Затем кто-то зовет его по имени, и он отворачивается, возвращаясь к празднованию, но ощущение остается. Моя кожа колется от беспокойства. Почему жених Эмили так смотрит на меня? Как будто он разгадывает загадку, как будто я важна. Я допиваю шампанское и ставлю бокал с большей силой, чем намеревалась. Вокруг меня гости смеются, произносят тосты и празднуют. Диджей начинает играть что-то бодрое. Эмили танцует с нашим отцом. Оба сияют. А я сижу одна в глубине, в своей форме, как в щите, и думаю, зачем я вообще пришла. И этот взгляд, будто он уже знал меня, преследовал меня весь вечер. Сидя за свадебным столом, наблюдая, как глаза Итана задерживаются на мне с этим странным узнаванием, меня откинуло назад к воспоминанию, которое я годами пыталась забыть. Мне было 12 лет. Я стояла на нашей тесной кухне, держа табель успеваемости как трофей. 6 предметов, 6 пятерок, идеальные оценки по всему. Я засиживалась допоздна каждую ночь в течение нескольких недель, училась до боли в глазах, полная решимости заставить родителей гордиться мной. Мой отец сидел за кухонным столом, читая газету, кофе остывал в его кружке. Я положила табель перед ним, мое сердце колотилось от предвкушения. Он взглянул на него секунд на 3, один раз кивнул и сказал: «Именно этого мы от тебя и ожидаем, Ванесса». Затем он вернулся к своей газете. Ни улыбки, ни поздравлений, только ожидание, как будто превосходство было моей базовой обязанностью, а не достижением. Через 2 дня Эмили вернулась домой со своим табелем успеваемости. Ей было 8, она еще училась в начальной школе, и она получила 4 с плюсом по математике. Всего 1 4 с плюсом, окруженная 3 и 1 5 по рисованию. Моя мать увидела это и буквально завизжала от восторга. «Эмили, ты улучшила свою оценку по математике! О, родная, мы так гордимся тобой!» В течение часа моя мать звонила по телефону, приглашая родственников на праздничный ужин. В те выходные у нас было любимое блюдо Эмили – лазанья, чесночный хлеб и шоколадный торт. Все потому, что ей удалось получить 4 с плюсом. Я сидела за этим столом, перекладывая еду на тарелки, и поняла нечто фундаментальное о своем месте в этой семье. Эмили праздновали за попытки. Меня замечали только тогда, когда я терпела неудачу. Этот шаблон повторялся бесчисленное количество раз на протяжении многих лет. Когда Эмили попала в группу поддержки после 3 попыток, мои родители купили ей новые помпоны и устроили вечеринку. Когда я выиграла региональную научную ярмарку, мой отец спросил, поможет ли призовая сумма оплатить форму Эмили для группы поддержки. Когда Эмили пригласил на школьный бал мальчик, по которому она сходила с ума, моя мать плакала от счастья и повела ее покупать платье. Upon my acceptance into a prestigious summer aviation program for military-oriented high school students, my mother's response was, quote, zero. To avoid encroaching on Emily's perceived importance, I learned to minimize myself, stashing my achievements in inconspicuous corners. I transformed into the responsible, reliable individual, the one capable of self-management while everyone else focused on Emily. The most painful aspect wasn't the absence of commendation, but rather my unsolicited appointment as Emily's primary caregiver. Our parents engaged in perpetual conflict over finances, my father's extended work hours, my mother's spending habits. Essentially, everything and nothing. Their arguments would crescendo after dinner, their voices escalating until the very walls seemed to tremble. Emily would retreat to her room in tears, and I would follow, offering solace. I'd sit on her bed, embracing her as she wept into my shoulder, stroking her hair, and reassuring her that everything would be all right. It was I who assisted her with homework when our parents were too preoccupied. I prepared her breakfast when our mother, after a particularly bitter quarrel, couldn't rise from bed. I was the one who inspected beneath her bed for monsters and promised her that family discord didn't signify a lack of love. My mother would collapse in the living room, tearfully lamenting the hardship of her life, how she never envisioned marriage being so arduous. My father would storm out, slamming the door with such force that the pictures on the walls vibrated. And I would wait for Emily to drift to sleep, then descend to meticulously restore order amidst the emotional debris. I'd steep tea for my mother, sitting with her as she wept, absorbing her grievances about my father. I'd collect anything that had been flung during the altercation, reposition the furniture, and reinstate tranquility. At 12, then 13, then 14, I juggled the roles of therapist, mediator, and parent to my own parents. Emily, however, remained untouched by these responsibilities. She only understood how to unravel and be comforted. She never learned to comfort another, for I was perpetually present to support her. By the age of 18, I found myself utterly drained. Drained from existing in invisibility, from perpetually holding everyone together while receiving no reciprocal support. I had already resolved to enlist in the army, to attend flight school, to construct a life where my worth wasn't predicated on catering to the needs of others. The evening I informed my parents, we were seated around the same kitchen table where my report card had been casually dismissed years prior. I had meticulously rehearsed my words, intending to explain my profound need for this path, that I had discovered my calling, that I aspired to serve a purpose grander than myself. Before I could even complete my initial sentence, my father's face flushed crimson. "The military?" he bellowed, slamming his hand on the table. "You wish to abandon this family to play soldier? That is the most self-centered notion I have ever encountered." My mother immediately dissolved into tears. Not the dignified tears she had shed at Emily's cheerleading tryouts, but rather harsh, accusatory sobs. "How could you inflict this upon us, Vanessa? We require your presence here. Emily requires you. You are shirking your responsibilities." Emily, then 14 and more engrossed in her phone than the conversation, glanced up just long enough to inquire, "Does this mean you won't attend my graduation? Are you certain this is what you desire? Will you be safe?" Merely concern about how my absence would affect her special day, still 4 years away. I departed for basic training 2 months later. My father offered no farewell. He looked through me as if I had already ceased to exist. That day marked the moment my father stopped referring to me as his daughter. The ensuing years of my enlistment taught me how to thrive without my family's affirmation. I learned to derive value from mission success rather than parental pride, from the lives I conserved rather than the recognition I consistently lacked. Yet, as I sat at Emily's wedding reception, observing her revel in the spotlight while I occupied my secluded corner table, I realized that certain wounds never fully heal. They merely learn to lie dormant until sufficient pressure is applied. Following the dinner service, guests settled into the pleasant hum of champagne and conversation when Emily rose. She swayed slightly, steadying herself against the edge of the head table, her cheeks flushed with both alcohol and excitement. Someone handed her a microphone. The DJ lowered the music. An expectant hush fell over the room, all eyes drawn to the radiant bride. Emily had always cherished moments like this. Even as a child, she would orchestrate situations to command an audience, ensuring every gaze in the room was fixed upon her. Today was her magnum opus, the culmination of her lifelong desires. She commenced with the customary wedding speech of gratitude. Thank you to her parents for this beautiful day, for their boundless love and unwavering support. Thank you to her bridesmaids for being her anchors, her dearest friends, her chosen sisters. Thank you to Ethan's family for their warm embrace. She played the part admirably, I had to concede. Her voice conveyed that impeccable blend of emotion and composure, drawing everyone into her joy. Tears glistened in many eyes. My mother wept openly once more. My father beamed with pride. This was Emily at her finest, the adored golden child. Then her gaze found me in the back corner. and something in her expression subtly shifted. A fleeting glimpse of something I had witnessed before, that intrinsic need to establish hierarchy, to remind everyone of their designated position in her universe. She smiled, but it lacked warmth. It was the smile of someone who had consumed just enough champagne to articulate her unvarnished thoughts, emboldened by an audience predisposed to laugh at her every utterance. And of course, she continued, her voice adopting a teasing inflection that tightened my stomach. I must thank my older sister Vanessa for being here. She's so engrossed in her very important military career. She paused for dramatic effect, allowing the words to hover in the air. Everyone, my sister is a desk warrior for the military. She shuffles papers somewhere safe while the true heroes engage in combat. She raised her glass in a mock toast, her smile wide and brilliant, as if she had just delivered the wittiest remark imaginable. The laughter struck me like a physical blow. It erupted from tables throughout the room, guests chuckling and assenting as if Emily had uttered something charming rather than cruel. My face flushed a hot crimson, blood rushing to my cheeks in that involuntary response to humiliation I had never quite mastered controlling. Some guests glanced at my uniform with bewilderment, evidently wondering why I wore military dress blues if I merely held a desk job. But most simply joined in the laughter, for Emily was the bride, and brides are expected to be delightful. A few individuals at nearby tables regarded me with a blend of pity and amusement, the same expression I had witnessed throughout my life. Poor Vanessa, so serious, cannot even appreciate a joke at her sister's wedding. I could have remained silent. I could have smiled and nodded, allowing it to pass, just as I had permitted 1,000 other dismissals to pass over the years. I could have receded into my corner and vanished, which was precisely what everyone anticipated me to do. But something within me, perhaps the memory of that 18-year-old girl who had walked away from her father's rejection, perhaps the pilot who had flown into hell and brought people home, perhaps simply the sheer exhaustion of being invisible, refused to be erased this time. I carefully set down my champagne glass and spoke. My voice was steady, calm, carrying the same tone I utilized over the radio during extractions, when chaos and fire reigned, and I needed my crew's implicit trust. The laughter died down in awkward pockets, like a retreating wave losing momentum. Conversations faltered. Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, beginning to grasp that Emily hadn't been jesting about something amusing. She had been ridiculing something profound. A few individuals who had served or had family in the military looked at me with dawning recognition and respect. An elderly man in a veteran's cap 2 tables away halted mid-laugh and leaned back in his chair, his expression sobering. The atmosphere in the room shifted, though not everyone yet comprehended why. But Emily, intoxicated by attention and champagne, failed to perceive the change. She rolled her eyes dramatically, playing to her audience, committed to her act. "Sure, Vanessa, whatever you say." She waved her hand dismissively, a gesture implying, "We all know you're exaggerating," and turned back to the crowd with a bright smile, ready to move on to more significant thank yous. The damage was done. She had secured her laugh. She had reminded everyone that I was the serious, dull sister, the one who couldn't quite rival her sparkle. She had made herself shine brighter by dimming me, and it had worked, just as it always had. I felt that familiar ache settle in my chest, the one I had carried since childhood, the ache of being diminished by the very person I had dedicated my life to protecting. I had held Emily when she cried. I had sacrificed my own needs to ensure her safety. I had sent money home to assist with her college tuition when our parents couldn't afford it. I had missed her high school graduation because of my deployment, and she had never forgiven me for it. Never mind that I was saving lives while she walked across a stage. And this was my reward: public mockery at her wedding, a stark reminder that my sacrifices held no significance, that I would forever be the shadow to her light. Across the room, I witnessed a transformation in Ethan's face. He had been smiling along with everyone else during Emily's speech, the proud groom savouring his bride's moment. But when I declared that I flew helicopters, when I stated combat rescue, his expression shifted as if a switch had been flipped. His posture became rigid, military straight. His jaw tightened, muscles flexing beneath his skin. He gazed at me with an intensity that seemed to thin the air, as if striving to penetrate through and beyond me, searching for something almost unbelievable. His hands clutched the edge of the head table so fiercely that his knuckles whitened. Guests nearby noticed his sudden shift, regarding him with puzzled concern. Yet, he appeared oblivious to them, his focus solely on me. Emily continued her speech, unaware of her groom's burgeoning tension, basking in the applause and laughter her little joke had elicited. I instinctively reached for my purse, poised to depart as discreetly as I had arrived, to slip out the back, drive home, and erase this evening from memory. This had clearly been a misstep. I should have known better than to anticipate anything different. But then, someone at an adjacent table, one of Ethan's military friends judging by his sharp haircut and bearing, leaned over and inquired, loud enough for others to hear, "Wait, you're Army Aviation. What's your call sign?" I hesitated. Call signs were not something one openly disclosed to civilians. They were earned in combat, bestowed by one's unit, carrying significant weight within military circles. Mine, in particular, bore more weight than most. However, I was weary of being overlooked, tired of allowing Emily to redefine my identity to elevate herself. So I directed my gaze at Ethan, not the man who posed the question, and spoke the truth, revealing my call sign. Iron Widow. The words left my mouth softly, aimed at the questioner, yet in the peculiar acoustic pocket between Emily's speech concluding and the next wave of applause, my voice travelled further than intended. Iron Widow. 2 words that held no significance for most in the room, but meant everything to a select few. I watched those 2 words ripple through the crowd like a stone disturbing still water, and I witnessed the precise moment they reached those who understood their profound meaning. An elderly man, 3 tables away, became completely motionless. He was perhaps 70, clad in a suit that no longer quite fit, and a Marine Corps veteran's cap he likely wore everywhere. His wineglass paused halfway to his lips, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that stole my breath. Then, slowly and deliberately, he set down his glass and rose. His movement was stiff, arthritic, yet purposeful. He began to clap, not with the enthusiastic fervour of a wedding guest, but with slow, measured strikes, each clap distinct and pregnant with meaning. The sound cut through the ambient chatter like a drumbeat. A woman near the bar, perhaps 50, wearing a Navy veteran's pin on her dress, sharply turned at the sound. Her hand flew to her mouth. She, too, stood, joining the Marine's applause. Then a younger man in his 30s, built as if he still frequented the gym daily, rose from his seat near the dance floor. He possessed that unmistakable military bearing, the kind that never fully dissipates even years after discharge. He clapped harder, faster, while others around him, initially confused, began to join in, not comprehending why, but sensing that something significant was unfolding. Within 30 seconds, a dozen people stood applauding, and the energy in the room had fundamentally shifted from a celebration of the bride to recognition of something far more profound. Emily's face transitioned from radiant to perplexed to irritated in rapid succession. She still stood at the head table, microphone in hand, suddenly finding herself no longer the focal point. All eyes were on me, and worse, they were applauding me. She attempted a laugh, a bright, tinkling sound she had perfected over years of deflecting awkward moments. "Well, that's quite a response for a call sign," she uttered into the microphone, striving to sound amused rather than threatened. "I guess everyone loves a good nickname." But her joke fell flat. The applause persisted, building now as more people stood, some without understanding why, but drawn by the collective emotion. Others, clearly having served or with family who had, fully grasped that Iron Widow was not merely a nickname. It was a legend whispered in certain circles, a pilot who had accomplished the impossible when others refused to fly. Then Ethan moved. The scrape of his chair against the polished floor was harsh and loud, cutting through even the applause. The room fell silent so abruptly, it felt as if a mute button had been pressed. Every eye turned to him. He stood at the head table in his dress whites, ribbons and medals meticulously arranged across his chest, an expression on his face I couldn't quite decipher. Not anger, not joy, but something deeper and more intricate, as if he had just unraveled a puzzle that had haunted him for years. Without a word, without even a glance at Emily, he stepped down from the elevated head table and began walking toward me. The crowd instinctively parted. Guests moved their chairs back, carving a pathway between us. I heard whispers, confused murmurs about what was happening, why the groom was abandoning his bride during her moment. My heart pounded in my chest. A part of me yearned to sit back down, to shrink again, to let this moment pass. But I had spent too many years making myself small. So, I remained standing, my hands clasped in front of me, watching this Navy SEAL traverse the reception hall with the kind of focus and intensity I recognized from my own combat experiences. This was a man on a mission. He stopped directly before my table, close enough that I could discern the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough to notice the small scar above his left eyebrow. Then, in one fluid motion that spoke of thousands of hours of training and discipline, he brought his hand up in a formal military salute. It was perfect, textbook, the kind of salute rendered to a superior officer or someone who has earned the highest respect. His back straight, his eyes locked on mine, his entire bearing conveyed honor and gratitude. "Thank you for your service, Ma'am," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of that silent room. There was something in his tone that constricted my throat, something raw and genuine that had nothing to do with wedding day politeness, and everything to do with something real, earned, and true. I hadn't been saluted in years, not since leaving active duty. I had existed in the civilian world, where my service was background information, a fact people politely acknowledged before changing the subject. But this salute reached something deep within me, something I had protected and concealed. My body responded before my mind caught up. I snapped to attention, muscle memory taking over, and returned his salute with the same precision and respect. For a moment we stood there, two veterans acknowledging each other in the language we had both learned in service to something greater than ourselves. Then the room erupted. The applause that had begun uncertainly now roared to life with genuine feeling. People surged to their feet, some wiping their eyes, others smiling with that fierce pride people feel when they witness something authentically honorable. Phone cameras appeared, recording this moment that had somehow become more memorable than any planned wedding tradition. The older Marine wept openly, still clapping. The woman with the navy pin had her hand over her heart. Even guests who had never served seemed moved by something they couldn't quite name, but recognized as important. I dropped my salute, suddenly overwhelmed and uncertain. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low enough that only I could hear over the applause. "Helmand Province, August 2017. You flew into an ambush to extract a SEAL team. You saved 6 men that day, including my brother David." His eyes were moist. He died 3 months later in another op, but he lived long enough to tell me about the voice on the radio who stayed calm when everything was on fire, who promised she'd bring them home and did. He called you Iron Widow. My knees grew weak. Helmand Province. I remembered. Of course I remembered. You don't forget missions like that. The kind where you're flying through tracer fire, your co-pilot is screaming, and you're running calculations in your head about whether your bird can withstand one more hit. I had pulled 6 men off that ridge, so pumped with adrenaline I didn't realize I'd been grazed by shrapnel until we landed. But I never knew their names. You usually don't in combat rescue. They're just coordinates and voices and bodies you load into your helicopter, praying you can keep them alive long enough to reach the hospital. I looked past Ethan to the head table where Emily stood frozen, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. Pale white to flushed red, confusion to understanding to pure rage. Her hands trembled at her sides, one still clutching the microphone she had forgotten she was holding. This was her wedding, her meticulously orchestrated day, where she was supposed to be the center of every photograph, every memory, every story people would recount afterward. But the applause wasn't for her. The phone recordings weren't capturing her. The moment everyone would remember from Emily's wedding wasn't the first kiss or the first dance. It was this, her groom saluting her sister. The sister she had just publicly mocked. The sister she had spent a lifetime trying to diminish. She attempted to smile, tried to raise her hands to join the applause, but they shook so violently she had to clasp them together. A bridesmaid touched her arm, saying something I couldn't hear. My mother looked stricken, torn between pride in me and horror at Emily's obvious distress. My father's face was unreadable, but he wasn't clapping. Ethan still hadn't returned to Emily's side. He remained near me, and I realized he was speaking again, telling me something about his brother's journal, about a promise he had made. That moment of respect echoed longer than any applause, and it broke something in Emily forever. Leaving the reception soon after Ethan's poignant salute, I discreetly exited as the guests were still trying to comprehend the scene. I bypassed saying farewell to Emily or my parents. My sole desire was to return to the peaceful refuge of my apartment, away from prying eyes, where I could breathe freely, unburdened by expectations or judgment. The 2-hour drive home passed in silence, with the windows down, allowing the cool night air to clear my thoughts. By the time I parked, I had nearly convinced myself that the evening's events would simply fade into our family's annals, becoming another awkward Mitchell family gathering to be collectively ignored. My assumption was profoundly mistaken. The following morning, I awoke to a deluge of 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. My phone vibrated incessantly, notifications accumulating too rapidly for me to read them all. Disorientated and still groggy, I opened my messages to discover links from people I hadn't communicated with in years, from old army comrades, distant relatives, and even the management office of my apartment building. Every link directed me to the same content, video footage from the previous night. Someone had captured Ethan's salute on video, and that anonymous individual had uploaded it online. Within a mere few hours, it had gone viral, spreading like wildfire across every social media platform I neither used nor controlled. The video was ubiquitous. On TikTok, accompanied by dramatic music, it had already amassed 3 million views. On Twitter, it sparked threads dissecting every minute detail, extolling Ethan's gesture and lambasting Emily's perceived mockery. Instagram Reels showcased the moment from various perspectives, as guests' cell phones had recorded the scene from different points in the room. Facebook, perhaps more egregiously, saw the video shared within military family groups, veteran support pages, and general interest communities, where individuals unfamiliar with either of us felt entitled to critique our entire lives. The most popular rendition, continually reshared, featured a caption that churned my stomach, quote, "0." The comments were merciless, thousands of them, from strangers who purported to know me, to know Emily, to understand every facet of our family dynamic from a mere 2-minute clip, followed by a skull emoji, seemingly signifying death by embarrassment. The remarks targeting Emily were venomous, transforming her into an internet villain, a meme dubbed used to epitomize pettiness and insecurity. Screenshots of her frozen expression, her flushed face, her trembling hands were being circulated with cruel captions and, quote, 7 reactions. By afternoon, legitimate news organizations had picked up the story. I encountered headlines I had fervently hoped never to see. Quote 8, quote 9. Someone had delved into my military records, which ought to have remained private, but evidently were not private enough. Articles meticulously detailed my 15 years of service, my deployment history, the commendations I'd received, and the missions I'd flown. My call sign, Iron Widow, became public knowledge. A military blog published an article titled, "The Legend of Iron Widow, the Pilot Who Flew into Hell," interviewing anonymous sources from my former unit who recounted stories I had never shared with anyone outside the military. I was being lauded as an emblem of quiet heroism, the veteran who served without seeking recognition. The stark contrast with Emily's public mockery made the narrative irresistible to an audience hungry for justice and vindication. I desired none of it. I am not on social media, I never have been, and I refuse to create accounts merely to read the unsolicited opinions of strangers regarding the worst night of my life. I declined every interview request, and there were dozens. Local news outlets sought my appearance on their morning shows. National media desired exclusive sit-downs. Podcasts dedicated to military service wished to feature my story. A literary agent even emailed, inquiring if I had ever contemplated writing a memoir. I ignored them all, endeavouring to reclaim my tranquil civilian existence, my job flying medical transports, my routine of work and gym, and the occasional dinner with the few friends who knew me before I became an internet sensation. Yet, the relentless attention was suffocating. Reporters set up camp outside my apartment building, lying in wait to catch me coming or going, shouting questions about Emily, about the wedding, about whether I had since communicated with my family. My building manager called to express irritation about the disruption. Former soldiers I had served with, individuals I hadn't heard from in years, publicly reached out on their own social media platforms, posting their own tributes and thanks, tagging me despite my lack of accounts. My work email, intended for coordinating medical flights, was inundated with messages from strangers expressing gratitude for my service, sharing their own military experiences, seeking advice, and offering support I had not solicited. This barrage of attention felt like the antithesis of the invisibility I had lived with my entire life. But it wasn't better. It was merely a different form of suffocation. I hadn't asked for any of this. My only wish was to attend my sister's wedding, quietly observe from the back, and depart without causing any disturbance. This was all I had ever desired for my family, simply to exist, neither celebrated nor condemned, just to be perceived for who I truly was. Instead, I had been transformed into a symbol, a character in a narrative millions of people were weaving for each other about respect, heroism, and family dysfunction, none of whom knew the real me at all. 3 days after the wedding, when I had finally managed to stop compulsively checking my phone every 5 minutes, and when the reporter stationed outside my building had given up and departed, I believed the storm might finally be subsiding. But then, my phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. I nearly deleted it unread, assuming it was another stranger with an opinion about my life. Yet, something compelled me to open it. The message read, quote, 0. It was signed simply. My heart began to pound, that familiar combat instinct kicking in when something just doesn't add up, when the situation is far more intricate than it initially appears. Afghanistan, 8 years ago. I had flown countless missions during my deployments, extracted innumerable soldiers from perilous situations, and saved lives whose names I never learned. Such was the inherent nature of combat rescue. You were a voice on the radio, a bird in the sky, a confluence of coordinates, timing, and adrenaline. You typically never knew who you saved or what became of them after you dropped them at the field hospital. How could Ethan possibly be connected to my past? What hidden knowledge did he possess that I did not? And why now, after everything that had just transpired, did he feel compelled to tell me? I stared at the message for a prolonged period, my thumb poised over the delete button. A part of me yearned to erase it, block the number and feign never having seen it. I could vanish, change my phone number, perhaps even relocate to a different city where no one knew about the viral video or my call sign or any of it. But another part of me, the part that had always flown towards danger rather than away from it, desperately needed to know. He claimed there was something I needed to understand about a past I had tried to forget. I replied to Ethan's text with a single word, quote, 0. He proposed a cafe situated 40 miles outside the city, a location where neither of us would be recognized, sufficiently distant from the media circus that had engulfed the preceding 3 days. I drove there the next morning, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, my mind racing through a myriad of possibilities. What could he possibly need to convey to me about Afghanistan that was so urgent, so private, that it couldn't wait or be discussed over the phone? The knot in my stomach tightened with each passing mile. The cafe was precisely what I had envisioned. Small, quiet, nestled in a strip mall between a laundromat and a hardware store. Only 3 other customers occupied the scattered tables when I arrived. Ethan was already there, seated in the back corner with his back to the wall, in the characteristic manner of individuals with combat experience. He wore jeans and a plain grey shirt, civilian attire that made him appear younger and more vulnerable than he had in his dress whites. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He looked as though he hadn't slept since the wedding. I slid into the seat opposite him, and for a moment neither of us spoke a word. Finally, he broke the silence. "I'm sorry about what happened at the reception. I didn't plan that. I didn't mean to hijack Emily's wedding or put you in the spotlight." His voice was hoarse, deeply sincere. "But when you said what you did, when you said your call sign, something inside me just snapped. I couldn't let her mock you like that, not you." I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup the waitress had placed in front of me, needing something to steady my nerves. "You said this was about Afghanistan, about 8 years ago." He nodded slowly, his eyes scrutinizing my face as if searching for the precise words. Then he asked, his voice cautious and deliberate, "Do you remember a mission in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, August 2017? A SEAL team ambushed, extraction under heavy fire." The coffee cup trembled in my hand. Everything within me grew still and cold, as it always did when someone referenced that particular mission. I remembered. God, I remembered. You don't ever forget missions like that, the ones where you know you're probably going to die, but you go anyway because 6 men are counting on you to be audacious enough to try. The Taliban held the high ground, firing from 3 positions, and the SEAL team was pinned in a dried riverbed with no viable escape route. Due to the intensity of the raging fire, every other helicopter in the vicinity had been grounded. Command had already assessed it as a lost cause, preparing to dispatch ground reinforcements that would take several hours to arrive. Hours those men simply didn't have. As the ranking pilot on duty, the decision fell to me. We were going in. My co-pilot, though regarding me as if I'd lost my mind, nevertheless strapped himself in, understanding the unspoken commitment that defined our roles. We kept low and fast, using terrain masking to evade the worst of the inferno. However, upon reaching the extraction point, we became fully exposed. I distinctly heard rounds impacting the hull, that characteristic metallic ping indicating damage to the aircraft. At that point, all one could do was pray. Fortunately, no critical systems were hit. My co-pilot was frantically relaying coordinates and issuing warnings, while the crew chief was returning fire. I maintained a calm, steady voice over the radio, assuring the 6 men below that we were en route, that I had them, and that they needed to be ready to move the instant we touched down. "I pulled out 6 men," I recounted softly, my voice barely distinguishable amidst the cafe's background chatter. "Barely made it out alive. My helicopter sustained 17 bullet holes. 1 round passed just 6 inches from my head." Ethan's eyes, now glistening, leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly on the table. "My younger brother David was one of those 6 men." His voice faltered on his brother's name. "He survived that day because of you, because you flew in when no one else would. He made it home, got to see our parents again. He had 3 more months of life." Ethan paused, swallowing hard. "He was killed 3 months later in another operation by an IED. He died instantly." The air seemed to escape my lungs. One of those 6 men I had miraculously pulled from hell, one of the desperate, frightened yet professionally composed voices I'd heard over the radio that day, had been Ethan's brother. I had given him 3 additional months, 3 months that nonetheless culminated in another country on another ill-fated mission. Ethan reached inside his jacket and produced a small, worn and stained notebook. Its pages were warped, as if having been thoroughly soaked and then dried. David kept a journal. He wrote in it every single day. After he passed, my parents gave it to me. He opened it with careful reverence, as one might handle something sacred, turning to a page marked by a faded ribbon. This is what he wrote about that day. He then gently slid the journal across the table toward me. I gazed down at the neat, precise handwriting and began to read. August 15th, 2017. I truly believed I was going to die today. We were pinned down, taking fire from every direction, and I overheard on the radio that all air support had been grounded. I mentally said my goodbyes to Sarah. Then, a voice came over the comms. Female, call sign, Iron Widow. She declared she was coming to get us. Her voice was incredibly calm, as if she were ordering coffee rather than flying into a kill zone. She told us to be prepared, that she had us, that we were going home. And she delivered. She brought us home. If I ever get the chance to meet her, I must thank her. She gave me another shot at life. My vision grew blurry. I hadn't known any of their names. I hadn't known what became of them after I dropped them off at the field hospital. They were simply 6 soldiers I had managed to rescue, 6 lives I had added to the mental ledger I kept of reasons why my work mattered. But to this man, to David, I had been the crucial difference between perishing in that riverbed and gaining 3 more months of life, seeing his family again, and chronicling in his journal the pilot who refused to leave him behind. For 8 years, I've been trying to locate Iron Widow, Ethan stated. I wanted to fulfill David's wish to thank you in a way he never could, but that call sign was buried deep within classified reports. I encountered dead ends everywhere I searched. I knew you were Army Aviation, and I had the general time frame, but I couldn't get a name. And then, 3 nights ago, at my wedding, you said it. You said Iron Widow. And I finally understood. The woman who saved my brother, the very person I'd been relentlessly searching for, was sitting in the back of the room. My wife's sister. I stared at him, attempting to grasp the weight of this improbable connection. Why did you marry Emily if you knew about her sister? His face clouded with pain and regret. I didn't know. I met Emily 2 years ago. She never spoke about you. The only time your name surfaced, she complained that her sister was cold, that she never came home for holidays, that she'd chosen the military over family. She portrayed you as distant and uncaring. I had no idea who you truly were or what you had done. I had no inkling until that night, until you uttered those 2 words, that my wife's overlooked sister was the woman I'd been seeking. The crushing weight of fate settled between us like a physical presence. I had saved his brother 8 years prior, entirely unaware of the ripple effect that single decision to fly into hell would have. And now, Ethan was linked to my family through marriage to the woman who had spent our entire lives hating me, diminishing me, erasing me from family narratives. The universe possessed a cruel, undeniable irony. We sat in prolonged silence, both of us striving to process the impossible entanglement in which we found ourselves. Then, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted to one of palpable dread. "It's Emily," She's been calling all morning." He hesitated, then showed me the screen. 12 missed calls, 20 text messages, each more frantic than the last. What he didn't know, what I wouldn't learn until much later, was that Emily had driven to this very cafe after tracking his location via his phone. She had been sitting in her car in the parking lot for the past 20 minutes, observing through the window as her husband showed me her brother's journal, as he recounted the story that had connected us. She had witnessed his tears. She had seen the way he looked at me with a gratitude and respect she had never earned from him. Emily had overheard everything, and she vowed to destroy the sister who had forever stolen her spotlight. I should have known Emily wouldn't let it go. I should have recognized that the sister who had spent our entire childhood vying for attention wouldn't simply accept being overshadowed at her own wedding. But I had gravely underestimated her capacity for cruelty, her willingness to obliterate everything rather than share even a sliver of the spotlight. 2 weeks after our cafe meeting, 2 weeks of relative calm, during which I had almost convinced myself the storm had passed, Emily made her move. The tabloid article surfaced on a Tuesday morning. Someone forwarded it to me before I even got out of bed, a former army colleague with a message that simply read, "WTF is this?" The headline sent a chill down my spine. Iron Widow's dark secret. Military pilot involved in fatal training accident. With trembling hands, I clicked the link, feeling my world tilt sideways as I read. The article alleged that I had been responsible for a helicopter crash during a training exercise 7 years ago, an incident that resulted in the death of a crew member. It portrayed me as reckless, glory-seeking, someone who cut corners and endangered lives in pursuit of my own reputation. The story included what appeared to be excerpts from my service records, meticulously edited to remove all context, making my decisions seem negligent rather than necessary. The truth was far more complex than the article implied. There had indeed been a training accident. A crew member, a young specialist named Torres, who had been with us for less than 6 months, had died when our helicopter suffered catastrophic mechanical failure during a routine exercise. The investigation had stretched for 4 agonizing months, an unbearable period of my military career during which every decision I had made was scrutinized by individuals who had not been in that cockpit. Ultimately, I had been fully exonerated. The failure was attributed to a maintenance error, a critical component that had not been properly inspected before flight. In fact, I had managed to prevent additional casualties by executing a controlled crash with the damaged aircraft, rather than allowing it to completely spin out of control. However, none of this intricate nuance appeared in the tabloid article, only the inflammatory headline and the selectively edited records designed to make it appear as though I had killed someone through my own incompetence. The article spread even faster than the original wedding video. Within hours, it was ubiquitous, shared with the same fervent enthusiasm people had initially shown when celebrating my heroism. Except now, the narrative had completely flipped. I watched in numb horror as social media turned on me with vicious speed. "She's a fraud! People died because of her. The hero worship was always fake. I knew something was off about her." The comments felt like physical blows, each one landing harder than the last. Anonymous strangers who had praised me just days ago now competed to condemn me most eloquently, eager to prove they had never been fooled by my supposed heroism. The source of the leak was anonymously listed as a family member close to the situation. But I knew precisely who it was. Those service records were not public. They were stored in boxes in my parents' attic, documents I had left behind when I moved out years ago, never imagining I would need to safeguard them from my own family. Only Emily would have had both access to those records and the motivation to weaponize them. Only Emily would know exactly which incident to distort, which moment from my past could be twisted into something damaging enough to destroy the reputation she so deeply resented. My employer contacted me that afternoon. The director of operations, A retired Air Force colonel whom I had always held in high regard sounded pained but resolute. "Vanessa, we're placing you on administrative leave pending our own review of the situation. I understand you were cleared by the army, but with the current media attention and the public nature of these allegations, we need to perform our due diligence. I'm sure you understand." I did understand. I understood then that nearly 2 decades of impeccable service, hundreds of successful missions, and an unyielding dedication to safety and excellence were utterly eclipsed by a single sensationalized headline. My grounding was immediate, and the professional repercussions were swift and devastating. Former colleagues who had extended congratulations and shared their own stories after the wedding video incident suddenly ceased returning my calls. My inbox, once teeming with messages of encouragement, grew eerily silent. A training seminar where I was scheduled to speak next month abruptly rescinded its invitation, citing unavoidable scheduling conflicts. The aviation community, a small and tightly knit world, values reputation above all else. Once compromised, even momentarily, even unjustly, its damage spreads like decay through wood. That evening, I drove to my parents' house, battling an internal storm of rage and desperation. I desperately needed them to acknowledge Emily's misdeeds, to finally stand up for me in a way they never had. My mother opened the door, her expression already weary and defensive before I'd uttered a word. I directly asked if Emily had taken those records, if she had leaked them to the press. My mother's face hardened. "I don't know what Emily did or didn't do, Vanessa. She's been very upset since the wedding. The entire internet has been calling her terrible names. This wedding attention hurt her deeply. Can't you just let it go?" Her words struck me like a physical blow. My career was in ruins, my reputation was shredded, my ability to pursue the work I loved was stripped away, and my mother was asking me to just let it go, because Emily's feelings were bruised. My father stood silently behind her, as unhelpful as ever, offering nothing. In that moment, I grasped a painful truth. I would never receive what I needed from them. They would consistently prioritize Emily's comfort over my justice. They would always demand that I be the more understanding one, to sacrifice, to absorb the fallout so Emily wouldn't have to face any repercussions. Ethan attempted to help. He uploaded the complete investigation report to his social media, meticulously explaining my full exoneration and clarifying that the accident was due to mechanical failure beyond my control. He wrote passionately about my service record, the lives I had saved, and the unwavering integrity I had shown. For a brief moment, I held on to the hope that his voice might cut through the noise, that people would listen to someone they respected. But Emily was also working on him, and she knew precisely which emotional buttons to push. She called me one night, her voice choked with tears, telling Ethan that I was actively trying to destroy their marriage, that I cared more about clearing my name than about their relationship. She accused me of manipulating him, of exploiting his guilt over his brother's death to turn him against her. "She's doing this on purpose," I overheard her sobbing in the background when Ethan called to explain why he had to remove his posts. "She's always been jealous of me. Now she wants to destroy my marriage too." Ethan was caught between the truth he knew and the distraught wife in his arms. His SEAL team buddies also chimed in, warning him with terms I later learned about. "Don't get involved in family drama. It'll destroy you. Let them work it out themselves." When Ethan called to apologize, explaining that he couldn't publicly defend me anymore without jeopardizing his marriage, I told him what I should have uttered from the outset. Stop defending me. I appreciate what you tried to do, but this isn't your fight. I'm used to fighting alone." It was true. I had been fighting alone my entire life, asserting myself while my family collectively opposed me. This was no different. Just another battle where I lacked backup, support, and anyone truly in my corner. When they took my wings, I learned how to fight on the ground. With no job, no reputation, and no family willing to stand by me, I had nowhere else to go but back to where it all began. The childhood home stood on a quiet suburban street, a modest 2-story house with faded blue siding and a front porch that subtly sagged on one side. My father had purchased it 30 years ago when he and my mother were newlyweds, brimming with optimism for the life they would build together. He had died in this house 5 years ago, a heart attack in his sleep that claimed him before anyone could say goodbye. My mother still resided there alone, either too stubborn or too attached to memories to downsize into something more manageable for a woman her age. Emily hadn't visited in over a year, too engrossed in wedding planning and her new marriage to make the 2-hour drive to see the woman who had raised her. I pulled into the driveway on a grey afternoon in early October, the trees already shedding their leaves, and felt the immense weight of every memory this place held. I had called ahead to inform my mother I was coming to stay for a while, that I needed some time away from the city. She had sounded confused on the phone, asking twice who was calling before finally recognizing my voice. Her confusion had compounded over the past year, small lapses in memory blossoming into longer periods where she seemed detached from the present. Walking through the front door felt like stepping into a time capsule. Nothing had changed. The same worn couch occupied the living room. The same family photos adorned the hallway. The same scent of old coffee and lavender air freshener permeated the air. I carried my suitcase upstairs to my old bedroom, which my mother had preserved exactly as I had left it in high school. Then, I drifted through the house like a ghost, revisiting the scenes of its former life. In the kitchen, I stood at the counter where I had prepared Emily's breakfast every morning before school, packing her lunch while she grumbled about waking early. In the living room, I recalled positioning myself between Emily and our parents during their most heated arguments, absorbing their anger so it wouldn't reach her. In the attic, accessible by a pull-down ladder in the hallway, I had hidden when the burden of being the family's invisible foundation became unbearable, sitting among boxes and old furniture where no one ever thought to look for me. Every corner of this house whispered of unacknowledged sacrifices, of the girl who had held everything together, yet was constantly told she wasn't doing enough. Being back here brought no comfort. Instead, it brought a stark clarity about why I had left, and why I had never truly been welcomed upon my returns. My mother's condition became starkly apparent within the first day. She would forget she'd asked me a question, and then repeat it 5 minutes later. She would begin cooking dinner, only to wander off, abandoning pots on the stove. But what unsettled me most were the peculiar phrases she kept repeating, fragments of sentences that seemed to surface from a deeper place than her usual confusion. "Your father's secret," she would murmur while we sat at the kitchen table. "He tried to fix it." And then, "The box, don't let her take it." Initially, I dismissed it as dementia, the mind's way of fabricating connections that didn't exist, weaving random memories into nonsensical warnings. Yet, these phrases persisted, always delivered with an urgency that felt distinct from her other confusions. One evening, I mentioned that Emily had called to check on her, and my mother's entire demeanour shifted. She grasped my wrist with surprising strength for someone so frail, her fingers digging into my skin hard enough to leave marks. Her eyes, usually cloudy and distant, focused with sudden intensity. "She doesn't know what she did," my mother said, her voice low and fierce. "She doesn't remember, but he knew. He always knew." I tried to ask what she meant, what Emily had done, but my mother released my wrist and receded back into confusion, asking if I'd seen her reading glasses when they were right in front of her. The conversation left me deeply unsettled. What secret had my father kept? What had Emily done that she didn't remember, but he had known about? I began to wonder if my mother's dementia was unveiling truths she had hidden for years, if the breakdown of her mental filters was allowing buried knowledge to surface in these cryptic warnings. I started paying closer attention to her words, jotting down the fragments in a notebook, searching for patterns. A week into my stay, I decided to clean out my father's old study, a small room off the main hallway that my mother had left untouched since his death. She couldn't bear to sort through his things, she had said, so everything remained precisely as he had left it. His desk was still cluttered with papers, his bookshelf still lined with technical manuals from his work as an engineer, his reading chair still positioned by the window. I started with the desk, sorting papers into piles, finding nothing but old bills and work documents. Then, I moved to the bookshelf, pulling out volumes to dust behind them. That's when I noticed it. One section of the shelf protruded slightly from the wall, creating a gap that shouldn't exist. I completely removed the books from that shelf and examined the back panel. It was loose. I pried it away and found a space behind it, a hollow carved into the wall itself. Hidden in that space was a wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, crafted from dark wood that had been meticulously sanded and finished. On its lid, carved in precise letters, were my father's initials, R.M., and below them, carved with the same care, Vanessa. Not Emily, not my daughter's, just my name. My hands trembled as I pulled the box out. It was locked, but the key was taped to the bottom, as if my father had known that if I found it, I was meant to open it. Inside, I discovered a collection of items that made no immediate sense. Legal documents with official seals, a USB drive labelled only with a date from 5 years ago, several letters in my father's distinctive handwriting, and a faded photograph of him standing next to a man I didn't recognise, both in what appeared to be a lawyer's office. I collected the letters, observing that they were all addressed to me, yet remained unsent, unstamped even. The earliest bore a date 3 weeks before my father's passing. It commenced with words that froze my heart. I settled onto the study floor, the box agape before me, surrounded by the tangible evidence of my father's hidden truths, and in that moment, I grasped that my understanding of my family was on the precipice of irrevocable change. Within that box lay the unvarnished truth no one had dared to confront. I dedicated the remainder of that evening to sifting through the box's contents on the study floor, striving to decipher the message my father had attempted to convey. The first document I meticulously examined was a life insurance policy. Its paper, yellowed with age, was dated precisely 10 years prior. The policy, under my father's name, was issued by a prominent insurance company with a death benefit of $2 million. My gaze swept down to the beneficiary section, anticipating my mother's name, but instead I discovered my own. Vanessa Mitchell, designated as the primary beneficiary. The policy had been active for a decade, with premiums consistently paid each month. My father had named me as the recipient of this sum should fate intervene, and he had done so 10 years ago, long before my wedding, long before any of the recent turmoil. However, a rusted paperclip fastened another document to the policy, a document that sent my heart racing. It was a formal change of beneficiary form, the standard instrument insurance companies require when policyholders wish to alter their death benefit recipient. This form was meticulously completed, every line filled in my father's distinctive handwriting. The new beneficiary section again listed me, Vanessa Mitchell, as the sole recipient. But this wasn't mere redundancy. Upon closer inspection, I realised this form was updating a different, older policy, one where my mother had initially been the beneficiary. My father had been systematically transferring everything to my name. His signature, shaky yet discernible, adorned the bottom, dated just weeks before his death. Yet, there was no insurance company stamp, no filing date, no indication that this form had ever been submitted. Had it been filed, I would have received $2 million after my father's death. Instead, I received nothing. My mother had claimed the insurance money and, as Emily casually mentioned at a family dinner years ago, she had allocated most of it to Emily for her wedding and a down payment on a house. My hands trembled as I scrutinised a small note affixed to the form with a piece of tape that had browned with age. The handwriting was my father's, but shakier than usual, as if penned in a state of exhaustion or illness. It read, "Vanessa deserves this. She gave up everything for this family. Emily will be fine. She has always been taken care of. If you're reading this, someone stopped me from filing this. Look at the dates. Trust no one." The words blurred as tears welled in my eyes. My father had sought to rectify the situation. He had finally recognized that I had been the one making sacrifices, while Emily reaped the benefits. He had intended for me to receive something, a token of acknowledgement for my contributions. But someone had thwarted his efforts. I fixated on the dates, pulling out my phone to consult the calendar from 5 years prior. My father had signed the beneficiary change form on a Tuesday. According to his death certificate, which I had reviewed during the funeral arrangements, he passed away that Friday morning. 3 days. In those 3 days, someone had prevented this form from reaching the insurance company. Who had been with him during that critical period? I retrieved the small desk calendar my mother had left in the study, the one my father used to track appointments. Tuesday showed no entries. Wednesday had one notation. Dr. Chen, 2 p.m. Dr. Marcus Chen, our family physician, a man who had been friends with my parents for decades and particularly close to my mother. Thursday's entry simply stated, "Emily, dinner." My sister had visited that night, a detail I vaguely recalled hearing about after the fact, as I had been deployed at the time. Friday was blank, the day he died. My mother had been with him throughout. Emily had visited the night before his death. Dr. Chen had seen him the day after he signed the form. One of them, or all of them together, had to know what became of this document. One of them had obstructed my father's final wish from being fulfilled. My hands, still trembling uncontrollably, seized the USB drive. The small device felt impossibly heavy, laden with information I both desperately craved and deeply dreaded. I opened my laptop, inserted the drive, and waited as the files loaded. There were 7 audio files, each labelled only with a date. The earliest was from 6 weeks prior to my father's death. The most recent was dated the very day he had signed the beneficiary form. I clicked on that one first, compelled to understand the events of that particular day. The recording commenced with ambient noise, the rustle of papers, the creak of a chair. Then, my father's voice, weaker than I remembered but undeniably his. Quote, 0. His words were slightly slurred, as if he were fatigued or medicated. I heard him moving about, the scratch of a pen on paper. He was narrating his own actions, I realized, creating a record of his endeavor. I filled out the beneficiary change form. I'm signing it now. Tomorrow I'll take it to the insurance office myself. No one can stop this. Vanessa gave up her youth for this family. Emily will be fine. She's always been fine. I thought you were at the store. You're giving everything to her after everything Emily has been through. It was my mother's voice, suffused with an anger I recognized from childhood, from all those instances when my actions somehow diminished Emily's life in comparison. More shuffling sounds, as if my father was attempting to conceal the papers. This isn't everything, this is just the insurance. The house is still yours, the savings account is still yours, but Vanessa deserves something. She's never asked for anything. My mother's voice escalated, losing the tight control she usually maintained. Emily has been through so much, her anxiety, her struggles with self-esteem, all because she grew up in Vanessa's shadow. You're going to reward Vanessa for making her sister feel inadequate? The logic was so warped, so perfectly illustrative of how my mother had always perceived our relationship, that I felt physically ill. I had been penalized my entire life for being capable, for not requiring as much attention, for making Emily feel inferior simply by existing and achieving. Emily has been coddled her entire life, my father stated, his voice gaining strength, gaining conviction. Vanessa has been forgotten, This is the least I can do." There was a pause, thick with tension. Then my mother's voice, colder now, once again controlled. "If you do this, you'll regret it. Emily is your daughter too. Think about what this will do to her." The recording abruptly ceased, cut off mid-conversation, as if my father had reached over and stopped it. I sat frozen, staring at the laptop screen. My mother had known. She had been present when my father signed the form. She had argued against it, threatened him, attempted to burden him with guilt for finally acknowledging my sacrifices. And then, in the subsequent 3 days before his death, that form had never reached the insurance company. I clicked on the next file, dated the following day, the day Dr. Chen had visited, and that voice in the background. I knew it too well. The second audio file was dated 2 days after the first, meaning it was recorded the day before my father died. I pressed play, a sense of dread settling deep into my bones, knowing that whatever I was about to hear would irrevocably alter everything. The recording commenced with the sound of a door opening, footsteps on hardwood. Then, my mother's voice, higher pitched than usual, trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "Emily, what are you doing in your father's study? Did you take the insurance form? He's being ridiculous, Mum. He wants to give everything to Vanessa just because she joined the military. That's not fair." Her voice carried that same petulant tone I remembered from childhood, the sound of someone who had never been denied anything and couldn't fathom why she should start now. My mother's response was quiet, conflicted. I could discern the weakness in her words even through the recording, the way she was attempting to assert authority while simultaneously preparing to retreat. This was the mother I knew, the one who set boundaries for Emily but never enforced them, who threatened consequences but never followed through. Emily's voice dissolved into sobs, and I could perfectly visualize her, tears streaming down her face, wielding emotion as a weapon, just as she always had. "Everything is always about perfect Vanessa. She's so brave. She's so strong. She saves lives. What about me? What about what I need? I'm tired of being the disappointment just because I'm not a war hero." The recording captured the distinct sound of my mother offering soft reassurances to Emily, words too indistinct for me to grasp. This was followed by the receding sound of footsteps, a door closing, and then a profound silence. It dawned on me then that my father had indeed set up his recording device to capture the hidden confrontation, though he himself was not present. He must have installed it in his study, suspecting an attempt to sabotage his intentions. His suspicions, it seemed, were well-founded. With hands trembling so severely that I struggled to control the mouse, I clicked on the ominous third file. The timestamp indicated it was from later that same night, drawing close to 11 p.m. The recording began with my father's voice, brimming with an anguish that struck me like a physical blow. "You burned it. You burned the form." His words dripped with disbelief and raw heartbreak, the sound of a man confronting his own daughter's profound betrayal. Emily's immediate response was a cascade of desperate sobs, rendering her words barely discernible. "I'm sorry, Daddy, I just want you to love me as much as you love her." "I've always loved you, Emily, but this isn't about love. This is about fairness. Vanessa sacrificed her youth for this family. She deserves—" "Call 911! He's having a heart attack!" Emily's wailing intensified, dissolving into an incoherent torrent of panic and profound regret. I could distinctly hear my mother's voice, trembling as she relayed their address to the emergency services, detailing my father's symptoms and desperately pleading for haste. The recording continued, and I compelled myself to endure every moment. There was the sound of my mother attempting CPR, her voice counting compressions aloud, while Emily's heart-wrenching sobs persisted in the background. The wail of sirens grew louder, signalling the ambulance's swift approach. Then, the arrival of paramedics, their calm, professional voices cutting through the pandemonium as they took charge, working with urgent efficiency to save my father. A scraping sound, as if the recording device had been moved or covered, indicated someone had touched it, followed by muffled audio. But it continued to record, faithfully capturing the harrowing reality of 14 minutes of desperate, frantic attempts to save him. The 14 minutes culminated in a paramedic's quiet, decisive declaration. 11:43 p.m. Then, nothing. The file ended. I remained in the profound darkness of my father's study, the laptop screen serving as the sole beacon, allowing the truth to wash over me in relentless waves of grief, incandescent rage, and a terrible, dawning understanding. My father had not been murdered. No poison, no deliberate act of physical harm. Yet Emily's actions had killed him as surely as if she had placed a weapon in his hand. He had a heart condition, a faint memory I retained from years past, managed through medication and meticulous stress control. The profound shock of discovering Emily's destruction of the insurance form, the burning of the document that represented his final attempt to acknowledge my sacrifices, had triggered a massive cardiac event. His weakened heart simply could not withstand it. Emily, I realized, had not intended to kill him. Her sole ambition was to retain the money, to secure her unchallenged position as the favored child even in death. Her actions were born of jealousy, entitlement, and that toxic fusion of insecurity and narcissism that had defined her entire existence. But the outcome was tragically identical. Our father perished on the floor of his study, surrounded by the debris of Emily's selfishness, knowing in his final moments that his earnest attempt to rectify past wrongs had ultimately failed. And my mother, rather than revealing the truth, had meticulously concealed it. She had never once mentioned the insurance form to me. She had never explained my father's attempt to leave me something, his belated recognition of the imbalance in how we had been treated. She had collected the insurance money from the original policy, the one that designated her as beneficiary, and generously provided most of it to Emily, for the wedding, for the down payment on a house, for all the desires Emily harbored and felt entitled to possess. My mother had witnessed my financial struggles, known I was sending money home to help with bills despite my own precarious situation, and yet she had remained silent. She had permitted Emily to reap the benefits of the very betrayal that had cost our father his life. I revisited the memory of the wedding, Emily's public cruelty and mockery, and now understood it from a profoundly different perspective. She had lived with this profound guilt for 5 years, the crushing knowledge that she had destroyed something invaluable, and that it had ultimately claimed our father's life. With every glance at me, she saw the person she had defrauded. Every commendation for my service or sacrifices served as an agonizing reminder of her actions. Her cruelty was no longer merely jealousy, it was a desperate act of self-preservation, a calculated attempt to dismantle my credibility, to alleviate her own guilt over annihilating my inheritance. I closed the laptop, plunging the room into absolute darkness. Tears streamed silently down my face. I reflected on all the times I had sheltered Emily, absorbed pain so she would not have to endure it, and spent years in deliberate invisibility so she could shine. And this was my ultimate reward, a father who had tried, too late, to make amends. A sister who would rather see him dead than see me acknowledged. And a mother who had chosen to shield Emily over honouring my father's final wishes. Guilt, I comprehended, could indeed be a heavier burden than blood itself. I spent the remainder of that night meticulously scrutinising every document within the box, systematically cataloguing each item my father had left behind. The oppressive weight of what had transpired sat heavy in my chest. Yet, beneath it, something colder and more resolute began to emerge. The urgent need to fully grasp the extent of what had been unjustly taken from me. Near the bottom of the box, beneath the USB drive and the official insurance documents, I discovered another set of papers that literally stole my breath. It was a will, meticulously handwritten on legal paper. My father's distinctively precise engineer's script filled the pages. The document bore the same date as when he had signed the insurance beneficiary change form, indicating he had dedicated that entire day to seeking to set things right before it was irrevocably too late. I read through it with painstaking care, my hands remarkably steady despite the burgeoning rage within me. The will bequeathed the family home to me, along with all his military memorabilia from his own distinguished service in the Navy, his personal savings account, and his cherished collection of first edition books, amassed over decades. To my mother, he left the remainder of their joint accounts and his pension benefits. To Emily, he left his car and a modest monetary gift of $10,000, accompanied by a pointed note stating that she had already received more than her fair share of support during his lifetime. The will was impeccably formatted, duly signed by my father, and notarized by 2 witnesses whose signatures and dates were clearly visible at the bottom. This was unquestionably a legal document, crafted with meticulous intention and profound care. But I had never seen it before. After my father's death, I had been deployed in Germany, unable to secure emergency leave in time for the funeral. By the time I finally returned home 3 grueling weeks later, the estate had already been processed. My mother had informed me there was little left, claiming my father's medical bills had devoured most of their savings, and that the house would go to her, and eventually to Emily, as I was, quote, zero. I had accepted this narrative then, quote, consumed by grief and exhaustion, having never expected anything from my family. I hadn't even known there was something to expect. I pulled out my phone and immediately searched for the probate records, publicly accessible documents through the county clerk's office. It took me a mere 20 minutes to navigate the intricate website and locate my father's case. There, scanned and uploaded, was the will that had been formally filed with the court. I downloaded it and meticulously compared it to the handwritten version cradled in my hands. The filed will was professionally typed and formatted, and it left everything to my beloved wife and younger daughter, Emily. The stated rationale was that, quote, I stared at both documents displayed side by side on my laptop screen, the handwritten pages resting in my lap. Their content was utterly divergent, yet both bore my father's signature at the bottom. I scrutinized the signature on the filed will more closely, zooming in on the digital scan. Something felt inherently wrong. At first glance, the signature resembled my father's, but the more I studied it, the more I discerned subtle, unsettling differences. The pressure applied was too even, the curves excessively perfect. My father's authentic signature possessed a slight tremor, a consequence of early-stage arthritis in his hands. This signature, however, was unnervingly smooth, almost as if it had been meticulously traced, as if someone had copied his signature from another document and painstakingly reproduced it. Someone, I realized with a chilling certainty, had fabricated a fake will after he died, and no one had raised questions because I wasn't there to contest it. I had been stationed overseas during the funeral, completely absent during the estate settlement. By the time I returned, every decision had been made without my knowledge or input. The following morning, I contacted Mr. Harrison, the attorney who had handled my father's estate. I vaguely recalled him from my childhood, an elderly gentleman who had provided legal services to my parents for decades. He was semi-retired now, his secretary informed me, but she could schedule an appointment for later that week. I stressed the urgency, stating it concerned my father's estate and possible fraud. She immediately put me through. When I arrived at his office 3 days later, Mr. Harrison appeared markedly older than I remembered, his once dark hair now completely white, his movements slow and deliberate. Without a word, I placed the evidence on his desk: the handwritten will, the probate-filed typed will, insurance documents, and copies of the audio recordings. I watched as the colour drained from his face, his hands slightly trembling as he turned the pages. He finally uttered, his voice thin. Quote 1. He looked up at me, and I saw genuine distress in his eyes. "I'd known your family for 30 years. I believed her. I never questioned it because Emily seemed so sincere. And you were deployed, and your mother confirmed everything Emily said." "Did my father contact you before he died?" I asked, maintaining a steady voice. Harrison nodded slowly, reaching for a desk calendar from 5 years ago he apparently still kept. "Your father called me 2 days before he died," he said quietly, running his finger down the entries. "He said he was making important changes to his estate and would bring documents to my office that Friday. He sounded determined, clear-headed. I told him I'd reserve time for him that afternoon. He never made it. When I heard he'd died that Thursday night, I assumed the changes he'd mentioned never happened." "I'm so sorry, Vanessa. If you have the original handwritten will, if you have proof of what he actually wanted, this changes everything." I departed Harrison's office with a signed affidavit detailing everything he had just told me. His confession of being deceived, his acknowledgement that the will he had filed was likely fraudulent. I possessed what I needed to unravel my family, to expose Emily's crime and my mother's complicity in concealing it. However, unlike Emily, who had acted impulsively out of jealousy and destroyed evidence in a moment of panic, I was not going to rush into anything. My entire military career had been spent planning complex operations, calculating risks, and anticipating opposition. I would approach this in the same meticulous manner. Over the next week, I meticulously copied everything: digital scans stored in encrypted cloud accounts, and physical copies placed in 3 separate safe deposit boxes at different banks. I entrusted one complete set to a friend from my army days, with instructions to release them if anything happened to me. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being thorough. Then, I scheduled consultations with 3 different attorneys specializing in estate fraud and probate litigation. The third attorney, a sharp woman in her 50s named Patricia Chen, laid out the reality with brutal honesty. "You have an excellent case," she declared, reviewing my evidence with the focused attention of someone who recognized its profound value. The handwritten will, the notarization, the audio recordings proving Emily destroyed the insurance form, the attorney's confession that he was deceived. Any court would rule in your favor. She paused, looking directly at me. "But you need to understand what this will cost. It will destroy your family publicly. The recordings will become court exhibits available to the media. Your mother's complicity in covering up Emily's actions will be exposed. Emily will likely face criminal charges for fraud and the destruction of legal documents. This won't be a quiet settlement. This will be a spectacle." I sat with that knowledge for days, turning it over in my mind, examining it from every conceivable angle. I didn't want revenge, or at least I didn't think I did. What I craved was acknowledgement. I wanted someone in my family to finally admit that I'd mattered, that I'd sacrificed, that I deserved more than erasure. But perhaps Patricia was right when she had suggested during our consultation that sometimes the only way to gain acknowledgement from people who've spent your entire life denying you is to force it through legal action. Maybe, in my family, justice and revenge were one and the same because nothing less than total exposure would make them see what they had done. Justice, I realized, wasn't about rage. It was about impeccable timing. I was contemplating at the kitchen table in my childhood home, surrounded by copies of documents and legal notes, meticulously mapping out the exact sequence of events that had led to my father's death, when a knock sounded at the front door. My mother was upstairs napping, her afternoon routine having become more frequent as her confusion worsened. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment I considered not answering, too exhausted and emotionally raw to deal with whatever neighbour or distant relative might be checking in. But the knock came again, more insistent, and I pushed back from the table and went to see who it was. Ethan stood on the porch, still in his work clothes, looking as if he'd driven straight here without a second thought. His face was drawn, tired in a way that transcended simple physical exhaustion. When our eyes met, something passed between us, the recognition of two souls caught in the wreckage of Emily's selfishness. "I know something happened to your father," he stated without preamble, "and I know Emily is involved." I should have asked how he knew, should have been more careful about who I trusted, but I was so weary of carrying this burden alone that I simply stepped aside and let him in. We sat at the kitchen table, and he recounted what had been happening in his marriage since the wedding. He and Emily were barely speaking, sleeping in separate rooms, moving through their house like hostile strangers. Emily had grown increasingly paranoid, making frantic phone calls to my mother at all hours, conversations that abruptly ended whenever Ethan entered the room. He had overheard fragments. "She can't prove anything. Just stay calm. Keep Vanessa away from family business." His SEAL training had taught him to read people, to recognize when someone was hiding something significant. And Emily was hiding something that terrified her. "I'm not here as her husband," Ethan said, his voice quiet but firm. "But I'm here as someone who owes you a debt I can never repay. My brother lived because of you. If you're fighting something, I want to help. We need to get your father's medical records, all of them." I had thought the recordings were enough, that the evidence I possessed was complete. But Ethan saw angles I'd missed. We spent the next 2 days navigating the bureaucracy of medical record requests, utilizing my status as next of kin and Ethan's military connections to expedite the process. When the files finally arrived, thick manila envelopes filled with forms and reports, we spread them across the dining room table and began reading through every page. The autopsy report was straightforward, exactly what I'd been told 5 years ago. Acute myocardial infarction, a massive heart attack caused by complete blockage of his coronary arteries. The cause of death was listed as natural, related to his existing heart condition. I'd read this report once before, shortly after the funeral, and it had seemed definitive. But Ethan read with the careful attention of someone specifically trained to find details others missed. He stopped on page 7, in the toxicology section, his finger tracing a line of text. "Look at this," he said, turning the report towards me. "Diazepam levels. Do you see the numbers?" I looked where he was pointing. The toxicology screen showed elevated levels of diazepam in my father's system at the time of death. The number meant nothing to me, but there was a note from the medical examiner. "Level consistent with 50 mg dose, triple the standard 5 mg prescription. Not lethal, but unusually high for routine anxiety management." I remembered my father taking anxiety medication, small blue pills he kept in the bathroom cabinet. But he'd always been careful with medication, meticulous about following dosage instructions. "Who filled his prescriptions?" Ethan asked, posing the critical question I should have asked myself. We went back through the medical records until we found the prescription history. Every refill for the past 3 years had been called in by the same physician, Dr. Marcus Chin. The name made my stomach drop. Dr. Chin, the family friend whose name had appeared in my father's calendar 2 days before his death. The doctor my mother had known for decades, who'd been at family dinners and holiday parties, who'd always had a soft spot for my mother and would do small favours for her without charge. Dr. Chin's practice had closed 2 years ago when he retired, but I found the address online and we drove there the next morning. The office was now a tax preparation service, the waiting room completely transformed. But the office manager knew of a nurse who'd worked for Dr. Chin and was willing to talk to us. We tracked her down to a small apartment across town where she lived with her daughter's family. Her name was Margaret, and she was in her 70s now, her hands shaking slightly as she invited us in. When we explained why we were there, when I told her about my father's death and the elevated diazepam levels, Margaret's face creased with sadness and something that looked like guilt. "Dr. Chin was a good man for most of his career," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. "But after his wife died, he got lonely. He started doing favours for old friends, things he shouldn't have done, refilling prescriptions without proper examinations, sometimes prescribing higher doses than necessary if someone asked. She looked at me with open sympathy. Her kindness extended to him after his wife's passing. She'd offer him invitations to dinner and routinely check on his well-being, fostering a devotion in him that suggested he would deny her nothing. The weight of these implications settled upon me like a suffocating blanket, heavy and inescapable. My mother, it became clear, had made a request of Dr. Chen. Perhaps she had conveyed my father's stress, his sleeplessness, or his urgent need for stronger medication to quell his anxiety. Perhaps she had deluded herself into thinking it was an innocent act, merely assisting her husband through a challenging period. Perhaps her intentions never embraced the tragic outcome. Yet, those pills, obtained from Dr. Chen, were found in my father's system at 3 times the standard dosage when his heart ultimately failed. The shock of Emily's betrayal undoubtedly triggered the heart attack, but the medication also played a pivotal role, obscuring his judgment, disturbing his heart rate, and creating the critical conditions that transformed a stressful confrontation into a fatal event. Margaret corroborated that Dr. Chen had indeed prescribed diazepam to my father in the weeks preceding his death, at a dosage surpassing conventional protocols. She was uncertain if my mother had explicitly requested a higher dose, but she possessed an undeniable certainty that Dr. Chen, when approached by a longtime friend, would not have hesitated to comply. He had placed his trust in my mother's desire to help, bending the rules perhaps because he was lonely, and she made him feel valued. I left that apartment building with Ethan by my side, the afternoon sun glaring too brightly, the world appearing too normal for the raw truth I had just absorbed. My father's death transcended Emily's impulsive destruction of evidence. It was a compounding tragedy, born from a succession of self-serving choices, every individual in my family prioritizing ease or comfort over what was morally right. My mother desired my father to remain calm and amenable during his stressful period of altering his estate plans. Dr. Chen sought to assist a friend and feel useful. Emily hungered to safeguard her inheritance. Together, these desires forged the perfect storm for tragedy. And the very pills that killed him originated from the woman he had cherished for 40 years. I waited until the following evening, when my mother experienced one of her clearer moments, when her gaze was steady and she recognized me without confusion. I laid out everything across the kitchen table, the recordings, the documents, the medical records, the irrefutable evidence of what had truly happened to my father. Ethan offered to stay, but I informed him that this was a confrontation I needed to face alone. Some showdowns demand witnesses. This one demanded only family. My mother's eyes scanned the papers spread before her, and I observed recognition slowly surface, swiftly followed by fear. "What is all this?" she inquired, her voice already defensive, already poised to retreat into confusion if necessary. "The truth," I stated simply. "About Dad? About the insurance form? About the medication?" I slid the medical examiner's report across the table, the toxicology section starkly highlighted. He had triple the normal dose of diazepam in his system at the time of his death. Dr. Chen prescribed it, but Dad never exceeded a prescribed dosage. Someone had to administer it to him. My mother's hands began to tremble. First came denial, as she shook her head, asserting she had no idea what I was referring to, that I was confused, that my deployment had impaired my memory. Then anger erupted, her voice escalating as she accused me of disrespecting my father's memory, of instigating trouble when I ought to let the past remain buried. But when I retrieved my laptop and opened the audio file, when my father's voice filled the kitchen talking about his attempts to make things right for me, her anger fragmented into desperation. "Please," she whispered, "please don't play that. I can't hear it again." Yet, I played it. I played the recording of Emily incinerating the insurance form, of my father discovering her actions, of his voice breaking as he tried to convey his enduring love to Emily. But this was not about love. And then I played the horrifying sounds that followed, The gasping and the crash, my mother screaming, the chaotic reality of his death filling the kitchen where we had shared thousands of family meals. When the recording ceased, my mother collapsed forward onto the table, her entire body racked with sobs. Through her tears, the truth emerged in fragments. She confessed she had asked Dr. Chen for something to help my father relax. He was so distraught about money and the future, she sobbed. He kept talking about making changes, about fairness, and she knew it would upset Emily. She simply yearned for peace in the house. She simply wanted him calm enough to think clearly. She had never intended to harm him. She genuinely believed she was helping, that a little extra medication would alleviate his stress, making him more reasonable, more inclined to preserve the status quo that kept Emily content. When he died, when she realized the medication might have contributed, she panicked. Emily was consumed by hysterical guilt. Admitting that the pills might have played a role seemed impossible, seeming as though it would utterly destroy Emily. So, my mother made a choice. She remained silent. She permitted Emily to burn the evidence of her own guilt. She allowed the false will to be filed. She accepted the insurance money and bestowed it upon Emily, constructing her daughter's perfect life upon the foundation of her father's death. I was still processing this confession when my phone rang, my mother's phone. The screen displayed Emily's name. My mother gazed at me with terror-stricken eyes, and I nodded. She answered, placing the call on speaker. Emily's voice resonated, frantic. "Mom! Mom, what's happening? Why did you call me crying? Is it Vanessa? Is she there?" My mother was speechless, unable to articulate words through her sobs. I took the phone. "Emily, you need to come here now." She arrived 20 minutes later, entering the kitchen and freezing upon seeing the documents scattered across the table, witnessing my mother's tear-streaked face, and observing me seated calmly with my laptop open. "What is this?" she asked, her voice small, already knowing, already steeling herself for the impact. "The truth," I replied, echoing what I had told my mother. "About what you did, about what it cost." I watched Emily's face as I presented the evidence, as I elucidated my discoveries. Initially, she attempted to maintain her composure, tried to frame it as a misunderstanding. But when I played the recording of her incinerating the insurance form, when she heard her own voice from 5 years prior declaring she could not live in my shadow, her composure completely shattered. She confessed everything, the words gushing forth as if she had been waiting years to unburden herself. She had burned the form because she felt invisible, unloved, believing I had abandoned the family for the military and therefore deserved nothing from a father I barely saw. "I didn't know it would kill him," she screamed, her voice raw with anguish. "I just wanted him to see me, to choose me for once. I just wanted to matter as much as you did." Emily collapsed onto the floor, sobbing so uncontrollably she could barely breathe, and the words continued to spill out. Every day since his death, she had been haunted by guilt. The wedding money, the house, the perfect life she had constructed, all of it built upon her father's death, and she was acutely aware of it. She could not sleep without medication, could not breathe without anxiety clawing at her throat. Every time she looked at me, she saw the person she had stolen from, saw the sister their father had finally attempted to acknowledge, and the guilt was unbearable. That was why she had become cruel, why she had mocked me at the wedding, why she had leaked my service records to shatter my reputation. Because seeing me was seeing her own guilt reflected back, and destroying me was simpler than confronting what she had done. I stood amidst the wreckage of my family, surrounded by individuals who had profoundly wounded me, and I arrived at a realization that left me more empty than angry. None of them were monsters. My mother was not evil, merely weak and desperate to circumvent conflict at any cost. Emily was not malicious, simply pathologically needy and willing to decimate anything that threatened her standing as the favored child. My father had attempted to rectify a lifetime of favoritism, but he had waited too long, acted too late, and his endeavor for fairness had inadvertently triggered the cascade of self-serving actions that ultimately killed him. No one had intended murder. They simply all made choices driven by their own fears and needs, and those choices had coalesced into tragedy. I looked at Emily, sobbing on the kitchen floor, at my mother, bowed over the table with her head in her hands, and I felt not the satisfaction of vindication, but the profound exhaustion of understanding. We were both victims, Emily and I, of a family that had never learned to love both daughters equally, that had pitted us against each other from childhood, and then feigned surprise when jealousy and resentment festered into something toxic. The crucial difference was that I had learned to survive without their love. Emily never had. I was on the verge of disclosing my intentions regarding all this evidence, about to delineate my terms for how we would proceed, when my phone buzzed with a news alert. Then another, and another. I glanced down at the screen and felt my blood turn to ice. The headline read, "Iron Widow Family Scandal. Sister accused of destroying will. Father's death under investigation." Someone had leaked the story. The news had broken and the entire world learned our secrets. I never definitively discovered who leaked the story. It could have been a neighbor who overheard Emily screaming through the windows that night. It could have been someone at the hospital who noticed Ethan and me requesting medical records and intuited a story worth selling. It could have been Margaret, the nurse who had spoken to us about Dr. Chen's inappropriate prescribing, feeling enough guilt to desire the truth to be exposed. Or it could have been someone at Mr. Harrison's law office who had seen the evidence of the falsified will. The source of the leak remained elusive, yet the disseminated information proved too captivating for the media to resist, unleashing a relentless torrent of coverage. A mere 2 days following my harsh encounter with Emily and my mother, a regional tabloid splashed the first article, emblazoned with the headline, "Wedding Scandal Deepens, Bride Accused of Destroying Father's Will." By the next morning, major news outlets had eagerly picked up the story, each adding their own dramatic spin. "Iron Widow's father died amid family financial betrayal," blared across a prominent news website. Meanwhile, entertainment blogs tantalized readers with the dark truth behind the viral wedding video. This saga possessed every element a journalist could desire. A distinguished war hero, a jealous sister, a deceased father, insurance fraud, and the delicious irony of a bride who, having scorned her sister at her own wedding, now faced exposure as a criminal. It was irresistible clickbait, the quintessential content for the outrage economy driving modern media. Within 48 hours, reporters had located the family residence. Peering through the curtains, I observed news vans lining the street, cameras fixed on our house. Journalists performed live stand-ups on the sidewalk, delivering their segments. Emily's frantic texts informed me they had also staked out her home. My apartment had been discovered too, though I had already sought refuge with a friend. Everywhere our family had a presence, cameras followed, microphones extended, and questions were lobbed at anyone passing by. The coverage was incessant, obsessive, dissecting every facet of our family's dysfunction with the gleeful cruelty of strangers who had nothing to lose. The internet, which had celebrated me after the wedding salute, now turned its analytical machinery onto every aspect of our lives. Reddit threads painstakingly timeline my father's death. Twitter arguments hotly debated whether Emily deserved criminal charges. TikTok videos used snippets from news reports to create dramatic reenactments. Instagram accounts focused on family drama reposted old photos of Emily's perfect wedding, contrasting them with headlines about fraud and betrayal. Every intimate detail of our family's suffering morphed into public entertainment, devoured by millions who felt entitled to judge us simply because we had been foolish enough to become a captivating narrative. My mother crumbled under the immense pressure. 3 days after the story broke, a neighbor called, informing me an ambulance had taken her to the hospital. I rushed there, only to find her in a psychiatric ward, sedated and barely responsive, diagnosed with an acute nervous breakdown. The intense scrutiny, the profound shame, and the brutal revelation of her complicity in concealing Emily's transgressions, alongside her role in my father's demise, had utterly shattered the fragile mental stability she had tenuously clung to. She endlessly repeated, quote, 0. The doctor's prognosis was grim, end quote, indicating she would require long-term care, her psyche severely damaged. Emily's life disintegrated even more rapidly. Her friends publicly abandoned her, posting statements on their social media accounts to distance themselves from her actions. "I had no idea Emily was capable of this," one former bridesmaid wrote. "I can't support someone who would destroy her own father's will and then mock a hero sister." The comments beneath these posts were vicious, each friend's betrayal lauded as if it were a righteous act. Emily's employer, a boutique PR firm reliant on reputation and image, summoned her for a meeting and subsequently let her go. While framed as a mutual decision, the truth was evident to everyone. Her Instagram account, once meticulously curated with images of her perfect home and marriage, was inundated with vitriol. "You're a disgusting thief! Your father is rolling in his grave! How do you sleep at night knowing you killed him?" She attempted to block users and delete comments, but they proliferated faster than she could remove them. Ultimately, she deleted everything. Every photo, every post, every trace of the life she had constructed, and her account went silent. I was appalled. This was not the outcome I had desired. I had sought acknowledgement, for my family to finally confront the pain they had inflicted upon me, and justice for my father's thwarted wishes. But I had never wanted this public execution, this cruel spectacle where strangers competed to condemn Emily and my mother most creatively. Through my attorney, Patricia Chen, I issued a statement. "This is a private family matter. I ask for privacy as we navigate this difficult time." However, the statement was disregarded, buried beneath an avalanche of hot takes and opinion pieces on family dysfunction, inheritance disputes, and the hefty price of favoritism. The world was celebrating my vindication. Articles lauded my integrity, my patience, my unwavering refusal to tolerate injustice. I received messages of support from thousands of strangers who saw me as a symbol of strength and resilience. Yet, sitting alone in my friend's apartment late at night, watching news coverage that dissected my family's worst moments, I felt nothing but a profound emptiness. I had yearned to be seen, to matter, to have my sacrifices acknowledged. Instead, I had garnered a media circus that transformed my family's tragedy into entertainment. My mother was hospitalized. Emily had lost everything. Our family's private dysfunction was now permanently archived on the internet, accessible to anyone who wished to find and judge it. I recalled my father's recordings, his voice expressing a desire to rectify matters, to ensure I knew my worth. If he could witness what had transpired, how his attempt at fairness had spiraled into this public demolition of everyone he had cherished, he would have been devastated. He had intended to quietly, privately, within the family, correct an imbalance. Instead, his death had become a scandal, his daughter's relationship irrevocably broken, his wife shattered beyond repair. This was not justice. This was merely a different kind of tragedy. I sat in the darkness, pondering if any path forward existed that didn't culminate in complete destruction, any route leading somewhere beyond permanent estrangement and public humiliation. I had won, technically. The world knew the truth. Yet, victory felt indistinguishable from loss. It was at this moment that Ethan called, asking me to save the woman who had tried to destroy me. Ethan's voice on the phone sounded strained, exhausted in a way that transcended mere sleepless nights. He stated without preamble. He continued. He was right. 2 days later, Patricia Chen informed me that Ethan's parents, whom I had never even met, had retained one of the most expensive law firms in the state. The civil complaint arrived by courier that afternoon. 43 pages of legal jargon that boiled down to a simple ultimatum: drop everything, or they would destroy me. They demanded I relinquish any claim to the insurance money, withdraw any potential criminal complaints against Emily, and sign a statement asserting the family dispute was a misunderstanding born of grief and mental health struggles. Their argument, meticulously crafted in legal terms, depicted me as someone exploiting media sympathy to extort a grieving widow suffering from severe mental instability triggered by her father's sudden death. They portrayed Emily as a victim of her own fragile psychology, someone who made mistakes while not in her right mind, and who now deserved compassion rather than prosecution. The threat was clear in every paragraph. If I did not comply, they would drag me through years of litigation. They possessed unlimited resources, which they would wield to bury me in motions, depositions, appeals, and procedural warfare. They would ensure legal fees bankrupted me. They had connections in the aviation industry and would guarantee I would never work as a pilot again. The lawsuit wasn't about winning in court. It was about exhaustion, about making the cost of fighting so prohibitive that surrender became the only rational choice. Patricia perused the complaint with the grim expression of someone who had frequently encountered such a strategy. "They have unlimited resources," she finally remarked. "You have a strong case. The evidence is overwhelming, but fighting them could financially ruin you. We're talking years of litigation, hundreds of thousands in legal fees, and they'll make every step as painful as possible. They're betting you'll give up rather than endure it." I asked for her recommendation, and her answer was brutally honest. "That depends on whether you want justice or whether you want to survive." The most agonizing part involved Ethan. He called that evening, requesting an in-person meeting. We met at the same cafe where he had first shared details about his brother David. This time, however, the atmosphere was entirely different. He couldn't meet my gaze directly, his eyes fixed on his coffee cup as he spoke. "My parents are convinced Emily is suicidal. They say if you press charges, if you take her to court, it will push her over the edge. They're asking me to choose between supporting my wife and betraying my family for a stranger. That's not use. That's not use. That's what they called me, isn't it? I know the truth, Vanessa. I know what Emily did. But they're my parents, and Emily is my wife, and they're telling me that your pursuit of justice might literally kill her. I need time to think. I need to figure out what's right here." I stared at the man who had saluted me at Emily's wedding, who had helped me investigate my father's death, who had stood beside me as we uncovered the full extent of my family's betrayal. And I realized he was on the verge of abandoning me under the weight of his family's pressure. The man who had publicly honored me now couldn't even look me in the eye. A cold, familiar sensation settled in my chest, the same feeling I had carried throughout my life. I was utterly alone, a state I should never have expected to transcend. "Do what you must, Ethan," I said, pushing back from the table. "I'm quite accustomed to solitude." In the ensuing week, Ethan ceased responding to my calls. My messages were routed to voicemail, and my texts remained unread. I internally rationalized that it was inconsequential, assuring myself I had endured far greater betrayals. Yet the sting was more profound than I cared to admit. Then, the images began to surface. Ethan and Emily occupied a pew at a Sunday church service, her head resting tenderly on his shoulder. Another depicted them at a charity gala, his arm encircling her waist, both impeccably dressed, beaming for the cameras. The tabloids, with their characteristic zeal, pounced on these visuals. "Navy SEAL stands by embattled wife," one headline blared. "Ethan chooses marriage over sister-in-law drama," another starkly proclaimed. "Iron widow left alone as family reunites." Social media, which had offered fleeting support during the initial scandal, now turned its venomous gaze back upon me. "Even her biggest supporter left her," a comment beneath a photo of Ethan and Emily read. "She's so bitter. She can't let her sister heal. Another user opined, this is why she's alone. She'd rather destroy people than forgive them. The narrative had once again shifted. I was now cast as the vindictive sister, incapable of releasing past grievances, preferring vengeance to reconciliation. Emily, conversely, was undergoing a public rehabilitation, largely by virtue of having a steadfast husband by her side, positioned as someone deserving of a second chance. I observed this metamorphosis with a detached numbness, a skill honed through years of experience. I had been lauded, condemned, celebrated anew, and now condemned yet again. Public opinion, I told myself, was ultimately meaningless. What truly mattered was the truth, and I possessed the incontrovertible evidence to back it up. I contacted Patricia, instructing her to proceed with all necessary actions, initiating proceedings for the recovery of the stolen inheritance and preparing documentation for potential criminal charges. If Emily's in-laws desired a legal confrontation, I was prepared to deliver precisely that. If I was to be labelled the villain regardless, I might as well fight for what was rightfully mine. "Are you sure?" Patricia probed. "This will be brutal, and you'll be doing it alone." "I have always done everything alone," I asserted. "This is no different." Yet, it truly felt different. Witnessing Ethan's allegiance to Emily, observing him present a united front with the very woman who had undermined my father's final wishes, felt like a betrayal that cut far deeper than a lifetime of familial neglect. He harboured the truth. He had stood by me as we unearthed every sordid secret. Still, when compelled to choose, he had chosen them over me. I resolved to proceed without him, indeed, without anyone, precisely as I had always known, deep down, I would have to. What remained unknown to me then was that Ethan was engaged in a game I was entirely unaware of, and the stakes were far higher than I could have possibly imagined. I was residing at a friend's apartment, plagued by restless sleep and jolting awake at every faint sound, when I discovered the envelope. Someone had slid it under the door sometime after midnight. Inside, nestled with a cheap prepaid phone, was a handwritten note on a torn piece of notebook paper. "Turn this on at midnight tomorrow. Trust me, E." I instantly recognized Ethan's handwriting, the same precise lettering that appeared in his brother's journal entries discussing the Iron Widow. My initial impulse was to discard both items, to refuse to participate in whatever elaborate scheme this was. But an overwhelming curiosity and a desperate need for comprehension compelled me to hold back. The following night I sat on the couch, the burner phone clutched in my hand, watching the clock hand relentlessly creep towards midnight. At precisely 12 o'clock, the phone rang. I answered without uttering a word, and Ethan's voice, rushed and urgent, came through. "I have 5 minutes before they'll notice I'm gone. Listen carefully. I didn't abandon you. I've been gathering evidence from the inside." He explained everything in a rapid torrent of words. By maintaining proximity to Emily, by presenting a united front, he had gained access to conversations and communications he would have otherwise never encountered. He had overheard telephone calls between Emily's mother and their attorney, discussing the potential existence of additional evidence they might need to locate and destroy. He had uncovered emails on Emily's laptop detailing their legal strategy, including correspondences about discrediting me by portraying me as mentally unstable due to my military service. He had meticulously documented everything, taking photographs, recording conversations, building a comprehensive case, not merely for estate fraud, but for ongoing obstruction of justice. "I couldn't tell you because they were watching everything," he stated, his voice strained. "My parents had someone following me. Emily was scrutinizing my phone. I had to make them believe I had chosen her so they would cease their vigilance around me. I am so sorry, Vanessa. I know how it appeared. I know what it cost you." He informed me that he would upload everything to a secure server and send me the access codes via an encrypted email. "Use it however you deem necessary, but there's something else you need to know first." Ethan then disclosed that he had already filed for divorce, papers quietly submitted through his attorney 3 days prior. The public grounds were irreconcilable differences, but his attorney had privately documented Emily's fraud and her exploitation of his name and reputation to bolster her defense in the confidential filings. However, a significant complication arose. His attorney had warned him that if I pursued criminal charges against Emily now, her defense team would immediately pivot to portraying Ethan as the true villain. They would allege he had manipulated me, fed me false information, and orchestrated the entire investigation as an act of revenge against a wife who had supposedly wronged him. The case would devolve into a marital dispute rather than a pursuit of justice for my father. It would become a circus, potentially dragging on for years, decimating both our credibility and exhausting whatever remaining resources we possessed. "I have a different proposal," Ethan articulated cautiously. "Allow me to negotiate a settlement. Emily publicly apologizes for destroying the insurance form and acknowledges that your father intended the money for you. She returns all the disputed funds, every dollar from the insurance payout, the value of the house she purchased with it, everything. She agrees to a plea deal for document destruction, probably probation given that it's her first offense and mental health factors are present. In exchange, you refrain from pressing additional criminal charges. It's mercy, Vanessa, but it's strategic mercy. She loses everything she stole, she admits what she did, and you receive what your father wanted you to have." My immediate impulse was to refuse. I yearned for total justice. I desired Emily to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, to face the same public annihilation she had attempted to inflict upon me. But Ethan continued before I could interject. "She has already lost everything. Her reputation is shattered. Her career is gone. Her friends have abandoned her. And I am divorcing her. She is one step from suicide." Even as we spoke, Ethan sent me screenshots, texts from Emily's mother, desperately pleading with him not to leave, imploring him to stay, just until Emily achieved greater stability. The messages radiated desperation. "She's not eating. She's not sleeping. She won't speak to anyone. I'm terrified she's going to hurt herself. Please, Ethan. Just a few more weeks until we can get her into better treatment." I stared at those messages, at the stark evidence of Emily's complete psychological collapse, and I experienced an unexpected sensation: uncertainty. My father's voice resonated in my memory from the recordings, his words about fairness, about how this wasn't about love, but about what was right. What truly constituted right here? Pursuing criminal prosecution might deliver legal justice, but would it embody the fairness my father had envisioned? He had sought to rectify an imbalance, to acknowledge my sacrifices, but I didn't believe he had desired Emily's complete destruction. He had loved her, even in his disappointment. He had wanted both his daughters to be well, but in a way that, at long last, recognized my contributions. "Let me consider it," I told Ethan, and we concluded the call. I spent 2 days grappling with the decision, meticulously reviewing the evidence Ethan had amassed, and conferring with Patricia about the realistic prospects of a settlement. She confirmed that criminal prosecution would be protracted, expensive, and potentially traumatic for all parties involved. A negotiated settlement, if meticulously structured, could achieve most of what truly mattered: an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, the return of stolen assets, and a form of accountability through probation. It might not feel like absolute justice, but it could be something superior to mere revenge. I reflected on my father, striving to set things right in his final days, endeavouring to balance his love for both daughters with fairness for the one who had been overlooked. I pondered how his attempt had tragically spiraled, because everyone had prioritised their self-interests over uncomfortable truths. Perhaps I could make a different choice. Perhaps mercy, strategic and clear-eyed, was, in fact, closer to what he had wanted than an all-out legal war. I called Ethan back and authorised him to proceed with the settlement negotiations. I had assented to mercy, Yet Emily had one more betrayal left to unleash. The settlement negotiations had barely commenced when Emily made her move. I was seated in Patricia's office, reviewing the proposed terms, when my phone began buzzing with alerts. Someone had sent me a link with the message, "You need to see this now." I clicked it, and the world seemed to drop out from beneath me. Emily was on national television, sitting opposite Diane Morrison on Morning Truth, one of America's most watched daytime talk shows. The program was renowned for its emotional redemption stories, tearful confessions, and hosts who championed underdogs. Emily had flawlessly positioned herself. I watched in horrified disbelief as my sister, clad in a simple dress and minimal makeup that rendered her appearing younger and more vulnerable, recounted a narrative I scarcely recognized. She asserted that the entire scandal had been orchestrated by me, fueled by a lifetime of relentless jealousy. "Vanessa always exemplified strength and achievement," Emily stated, her voice quivering with a cultivated vulnerability. "I believe she resented my happiness, particularly my marriage, while she remained unattached. The evidence she purports to possess has been fabricated. She's distorted conversations and documents to cast me in a monstrous light. We need to talk. Not about the wedding. I owe you a debt I can never repay. I couldn't tell you because they were watching, was made to appear as a man concealing an illicit affair." Emily wept as she recounted her discovery of these messages, claiming she realized her own sister had emotionally manipulated and turned her husband against her. "I should have recognized the warning signs at my own wedding," she sobbed. "The way he looked at her, the way he saluted her as if she held more significance than his own wife." Diane's face mirrored sympathetic indignation. "So, you are asserting that your war hero sister exploited her military status to manipulate your husband and shatter your marriage?" Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. The segment concluded with Diane's promise to thoroughly investigate this disturbing narrative and urged viewers to withhold judgment until all perspectives were heard. However, the damage was irreversible. Social media exploded with immediate and virulent comments. Things escalated further. Hours after the interview aired, Emily unleashed a second weapon, an expertly edited version of my wedding video, meticulously crafted to convey a narrative far removed from reality. The video showcased Ethan's salute to me, intercut with footage of our hushed conversations at the reception, shots carefully chosen to imply an intimate body language. Emily's mournful and reflective voiceover accompanied the visuals. Quote, "0. The editing was a manipulative triumph designed to revise history. Within hours, the video went viral, eclipsing even the original wedding footage in viewership. The public narrative reversed completely. Comments inundated every platform. Quote 1, quote 2, quote 3, quote 4, quote 5. I witnessed 2 decades of selfless service, sacrifices that had gone unacknowledged, obliterated in a 15-minute talk show segment and a 3-minute edited video." Patricia immediately called, her voice taut with restrained fury. Yet I understood the reality she was attempting to evade. Litigation would drag on for months, perhaps years. By the time we secured a court date, by the time we definitively proved Emily's deceit, the harm would be irreversible. The internet never forgets, but it also never rectifies. I would forever be branded the sister who destroyed her family, regardless of any eventual court ruling. Ethan was beyond enraged. He arrived at my apartment that evening, pacing like a caged animal, his military discipline barely containing his fury. "We release everything," he declared. "The recordings of Emily admitting she burned the insurance form, the evidence of the falsified will, her history of manipulation and lies. We bury her with the truth." He held his phone, poised to upload files, ready to unleash total war. I intervened. "No," I said quietly. "That's precisely what she desires. Don't you see? The more we publicly feud, the more this appears to be a bitter family dispute where everyone is equally culpable. There are no heroes in a mud fight, Ethan.
Only individuals covered in dirt.
I could see his desire to argue, to defend me as he had at the wedding. But I perceived something he did not. Emily was engaged in a desperate gamble, throwing every last thing she had at me because she had nothing left to lose. Fighting her on her own terms, in the arena of public opinion and viral videos, meant everyone would lose. I made a different choice. I directly contacted the producer of Morning Truth and expressed my desire to appear on the show. Not to engage in a debate with Emily, not to present contradictory evidence, but to narrate my story once, completely and truthfully, in my own words. I will grant you one interview, I informed the producer. 10 minutes uninterrupted. No dramatic music, no editing, no host commentary until I conclude. Just me and the camera. After that, I am finished. You can accept it or decline it. The producer, recognizing the potential for exceptional ratings from a direct response by the enigmatic Iron Widow, immediately consented. We scheduled it for 3 days later. I spent those 3 days preparing, not with lawyers or PR consultants, but in solitude. I meticulously wrote down what I wished to say, practiced delivering it without emotion or anger, and focused on simple truth instead of counter-accusations. I would not play Emily's game. I would not cry theatrically, manipulate footage, or portray myself as a victim. I would simply convey the truth about what it felt like to be invisible within my own family, about what my father had attempted to do, and about the decision I was now making to walk away rather than further damage what remained of us. The night before the interview, my phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. I instantly knew it was Emily. The message was concise, just 5 words that carried the weight of our fractured past.
You'll regret this.
Quote, I am not here to attack my sister. Quote, I am here to tell you what it feels like to be invisible. I observed Diane's expression shift, realizing this would not be the interview she had envisioned. I recounted my childhood, not as a tear-jerking anecdote designed to elicit sympathy, but as unvarnished fact. I described being 12 years old and preparing breakfast for 8-year-old Emily before school because our parents were too preoccupied with their arguments to notice we needed to eat. I explained how I had worked 2 jobs in high school and contributed the earnings to my parents so Emily could pursue the music lessons she desired. I spoke about joining the military, not to escape my family, but because it was the sole environment where I had ever felt valued for who I was, rather than for what I could sacrifice for another. My sister claimed I was jealous of her happiness, I continued, my voice steady. But I was never jealous of Emily. I was tired of being forgotten, tired of having my sacrifices erased, tired of being told I was selfish for wanting to be seen. The studio was absolutely silent. Even Diane had ceased attempting to interject with questions. Then I executed my initial plan. I produced my laptop and requested permission to play audio recordings. Diane nodded, though I detected uncertainty on her face. I first played my father's voice, explaining his attempts to rectify matters, his desire to acknowledge my contributions to the family. Then I played Emily's voice, younger and desperate, admitting she had burned the insurance form because she could not bear living in my shadow. I played the dreadful sounds of my father's heart attack, the chaos of his demise. Finally, I played my mother's confession about asking Dr. Chen for medication to keep my father calm. When the recordings concluded, the silence in the studio was profound. The audience sat motionless. Some covered their mouths with their hands, others wept openly. Diane appeared genuinely shaken, her professional composure shattered. "Why didn't you release these earlier?" she inquired, her voice barely a whisper. "This validates everything you have stated. Why allow people to believe you were lying?" I felt tears trace paths down my face, not the exquisitely beautiful crying Emily had performed, but the weary tears of someone who had borne an immense burden for too long. Because she's still my sister, I said. I spent my entire life protecting her. I couldn't just stop. My voice faltered. I don't want revenge. I never wanted revenge. I just wanted someone to say, "We saw you. We're sorry." That's all I ever wanted, to be seen. Diane allowed the moment to breathe, permitting my words to settle over the audience. Then she posed the question I had anticipated. If Emily were here right now, what would you say to her? I paused, collecting my thoughts, knowing Emily was watching this somewhere, knowing this was my final opportunity to articulate what needed to be said. I looked directly into the camera again, addressing my sister across the vast distance and damage between us. I forgive you, I stated simply. I forgive you because carrying this anger would destroy me more than it would harm you. What you did was wrong. What you took from me can never be returned. But clinging to hatred would only poison what remains of my life, and I will not grant you that power. I drew a breath. However, I can no longer have you in my life. The emotional toll of loving you has simply become too formidable. I genuinely hope you discover inner peace, Emily, and that you seek the help you need. May you learn to coexist with the repercussions of your actions. I sincerely wish that for you. Nevertheless, I cannot partake in that journey. I must now prioritize my own salvation. The studio audience rose to their feet. The applause began as a gentle murmur, then swelled into a resounding ovation. Not the boisterous enthusiasm of a crowd enjoying entertainment, but a profound and respectful acknowledgement from individuals observing a raw, painful, and authentic human moment. They were applauding integrity, not theatricality. They were recognizing unwavering grace amidst circumstances that would have shattered most people. Within a few hours, the interview segment was ubiquitous. Yet, unlike previous viral episodes, this one disseminated in a distinct manner. It wasn't shared with cruel remarks or knee-jerk criticisms. Instead, people circulated it with accompanying messages such as, "Everyone must witness this," and "This exemplifies true resilience." The prevailing narrative underwent a complete and irreversible transformation. Emily's selectively edited video clips were exposed as the manipulative fabrications they truly were. Her television appearance was recontextualized as the desperate fabrication of someone caught in undeniable deceit. Most significantly, I emerged as a symbol, not of military valor or familial strife, but of something far more profound: the courage to opt for grace over retribution, to offer forgiveness without condoning forgetfulness, and to disengage from toxicity, even when it manifests within the guise of family. Ethan contacted me afterward, his voice thick with emotion. "You did it," he declared. "You triumphed without having to fight." But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like finally shedding a burden I had carried since childhood, like at last granting myself permission to cease shielding individuals who had never extended that protection to me. 2 days subsequently, my mother passed away, and her revised final will altered everything. My mother's demise occurred with unexpected suddenness, her frail heart ultimately failing in the psychiatric ward where she had been confined since her emotional breakdown. I was in the midst of making funeral arrangements when the court notification arrived. Mediation was scheduled for the following week. The timing felt cruelly ironic, burying my mother and then enduring a meeting with Emily to negotiate the terms of our family's definitive fragmentation. Yet, perhaps it was fitting that everything would conclude simultaneously, that we would heal all the lingering wounds at once, rather than allowing them to fester indefinitely. The mediation took place in an uninspiring conference room at the courthouse. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow upon a long table that separated the two parties like a demilitarized zone. Patricia sat vigilantly beside me, her files and documents meticulously arranged. Emily's attorney, an older man specializing in the defense of affluent clients, sat next to Emily, who appeared smaller and more subdued than I had ever witnessed. She wore a modest dress, devoid of makeup, her hair simply pulled back. She emanated the aura of someone who had been hollowed out from within. The mediator was a woman in her 60s named Helen Gardner, a former family court judge possessing decades of experience navigating precisely such predicaments. She listened intently as Patricia systematically presented the evidence: the falsified will with its traced signature, the destroyed insurance form meticulously documented in my father's recordings, and the financial statements showcasing how Emily had expended the disputed inheritance on her wedding and the down payment for her house. The case was impregnable. Emily had perpetrated fraud, obliterated legal documents, and the evidence was beyond dispute. Emily's attorney countered with the defense we had anticipated. He argued for diminished capacity, presenting documentation of Emily's mental health struggles subsequent to our father's death. He provided psychiatric evaluations detailing severe depression, anxiety, and what one physician termed a psychotic break triggered by complicated grief. The crux of the argument was that Emily had not been in her right mind when she destroyed the evidence, that her actions stemmed from mental illness rather than malicious intent. It was a strategy engineered to elicit sympathy and avert criminal charges. Helen listened to both presentations with the impassive expression of someone who had heard every permutation of familial strife. Then, she did something I hadn't expected. She addressed both attorneys, stating firmly, "I would like both of you to step outside. These two need to converse without lawyers dictating their dialogue." Patricia began to object, citing the necessity of legal counsel during negotiations.
But Helen interrupted her.
1 hour. You may wait in the hallway. If they fail to make progress, you may return, and we will proceed formally. But I believe they need to attempt this first. When the attorneys departed, reluctantly gathering their files, the room suddenly felt both excessively vast and incredibly cramped. Emily and I sat facing each other, an empty table serving as a chasm between us. Two sisters who had become strangers, two women shaped by the same fractured family in profoundly divergent ways. Helen moved to a chair in the corner, sufficiently distant to afford us privacy, yet present enough to intercede if required. "You have an hour," she stated quietly. "Utilize it." Initially, silence reigned. Emily gazed at her hands, and I stared at her, awaiting something, though I knew not what. Then, so softly I nearly missed it, Emily whispered, "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air between us, inadequate and insufficient, 2 syllables utterly incapable of encapsulating the devastation she had wrought. I did not immediately accept the apology. Instead, I posed the question I had yearned to ask for decades, the query that had tormented me through childhood, military service, and all the years of feeling unseen. "Why did you despise me so intensely?" Emily's face crumpled. She looked up at me, her eyes inflamed from crying, from exhaustion, from carrying a burden of guilt that had consumed her. "Because you were everything I could never be," she said, her voice fracturing. "Smart, brave, strong, independent. I was merely, well, pretty. And I knew that when prettiness faded, I would have nothing." She wrapped her arms around herself, as if attempting to hold her fractured self together. "You had Dad's respect. I only had his pity. Do you comprehend what it's like to be valued solely for your appearance rather than your essence? To know that the only reason people notice you is because you're deemed decorative?" I began to formulate a response, to assert that at least she had received some form of love. But Emily continued, "I never intended to kill him. God, Vanessa, I have spent every day since wishing I had died instead of him. Every single morning I awaken and recall what I did, and I yearn to cease existing. The sole thing that sustained me was constructing this perfect life, proving I could be more than just pretty. And then you arrived at my wedding, and everything disintegrated." Then Emily disclosed something I hadn't known, a detail that caused all the disparate pieces to finally coalesce. "After Dad passed away, before you returned from deployment, I was going through his study. I discovered that wooden box. I found the handwritten letter he had written to you. She looked at me with an expression akin to shame. He stated that he was proud of you, that he regretted favoring me, that he had failed you, that you were the strong one and he should have told you. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I incinerated that letter too. I couldn't bear it. Even in death, even after everything, he loved you more, he respected you more, and I couldn't allow you to have that. I wanted you to experience the pain I felt. I wanted you to feel invisible, as I always felt internally. I gazed at my sister as she completely broke down, sobbing so intensely she could barely breathe. And I finally comprehended something I had never perceived before. We had both been starved by our parents' inability to extend equal affection. I had been deprived of warmth and acknowledgement. Emily had been deprived of genuine respect and validation. My wound had rendered me reserved and self-sufficient. Her wound had transformed her into someone cruel and desperate. We had both been casualties of the same dysfunction, simply damaged in divergent ways. Helen softly spoke from her corner. I looked at Emily, broken and guilt-ridden, drowning in consequences she had inadvertently created. I surveyed the wreckage of our family, the price we had both paid for our parents' failings, and I contemplated what moving forward might truly entail. Not a forgiveness that excused accountability, but an acknowledgement that we had both suffered, both made choices rooted in pain, and both needed to discover a way to coexist with the unalterable. Yes, I stated. Yes, Emily echoed. We both affirmed yes, but neither of us then understood the full cost. The price became evident when we reconvened with our attorneys, and the mediator drafted the settlement terms. Emily would be required to return all the disputed inheritance money, approximately $800,000, after accounting for what she had already spent on her wedding and house. She would have to sell the house, liquidate assets, and borrow from Ethan's parents if necessary. However, the full amount would be remitted to me within 6 months. She would also issue a public written apology, acknowledging that she had destroyed our father's insurance beneficiary form and that I was the rightful recipient of the funds. The apology could not attribute blame to mental illness or diminished capacity. It had to be an unequivocal acceptance of responsibility. Furthermore, Emily would plead guilty to document destruction and accept 5 years of probation, which entailed regular check-ins with a probation officer, community service, and any violation would result in incarceration. In exchange, I agreed to drop all potential criminal charges beyond the document destruction plea. I would not pursue charges related to the forged will or the medication that may have contributed to my father's death. I would not sue Emily civilly for emotional distress or defamation. This settlement would signify the complete cessation of legal action between us. The family home would be transferred to me, as my father had intended. Emily would retain whatever remained of her marital assets, though those would be apportioned separately in her divorce from Ethan, which was proceeding irrespective of our settlement. Once the agreement was officially filed with the court and became accessible to the public, the ensuing media interpretation was, as anticipated, sharply divided. Certain news channels lauded my act of clemency, portraying the settlement as a prime instance of justice, tempered by compassion. Conversely, others critiqued my leniency, alleging I was overly soft for allowing Emily to escape with mere probation, despite her clear involvement in fraud and her potential contribution to our father's demise. The online discourse, a torrent of opinions, ranged from, "This is what grace looks like," to, "She should be in prison." I ceased reading these comments after the initial day, having realized that public validation was never my primary objective. 2 weeks following the signing of the settlement, I received the call I had subconsciously braced myself for since my mother's hospitalization. She had peacefully passed away in her sleep at the psychiatric facility, her compromised heart finally succumbing. The physician remarked that, given her age and the immense stress she had endured, this outcome was not unforeseen. A peculiar numbness enveloped me upon hearing the news, a complex blend of grief and the profound relief that her suffering had ended, all entangled with the lingering anger and hurt I still harboured towards her. The funeral was a modest and private affair, attended only by Emily, Ethan, a few distant relatives, and myself. We had mutually decided to maintain discretion, shunning any media presence or public spectacle. While I was assisting in organising my mother's possessions at the facility, a nurse presented me with a sealed envelope, my name inscribed on it in my mother's tremulous handwriting. "She asked me to give this to you after she passed," the nurse conveyed softly. I restrained myself until I was alone in my car before opening it. The letter inside was dated the day prior to my mother's death, penned on lined paper in a script that visibly deteriorated towards the end, suggesting she had battled profound exhaustion to complete it. It commenced, a phrase that forced me to pause, as I struggled to recall the last time my mother had addressed me with such endearment, if ever. In that letter, she laid bare everything. She admitted knowing that Emily had destroyed the insurance form. She was aware of Emily's request for extra medication from Dr. Chen and suspected it might have contributed to my father's death. She knew I was systematically being erased from the family's memory and its financial legacy, yet she acknowledged her own weakness, her profound fear of confrontation, and her unwavering commitment to shielding Emily at all costs, which prevented her from advocating for me. "I failed you every day of your life," she confessed. "You were always the strongest, and I resented you for it, because it served as a stark reminder of my own inadequacies. Every time I looked at you, I saw the woman I should have been but wasn't." "I am so profoundly sorry, Vanessa. You deserved more. You deserved a mother brave enough to love both her daughters equally." The words blurred as tears welled in my eyes, yet an unstoppable compulsion drove me to continue reading, for there was more. My mother had included the banking details for an account I had never been aware of. She had established it years ago, precisely when I first enlisted in the military, and had consistently deposited $500 monthly for a continuous span of 15 years. This money had been painstakingly amassed from household budgets, from birthday funds sent by relatives, from any source she could discreetly access without my father or Emily ever noticing. The account now held a substantial $90,000. "I recognize this cannot rectify anything," she penned towards the end, her handwriting at this point almost illegible. "I understand it cannot compensate for a lifetime of shortcomings, but I desperately need you to know that I saw you. I always saw you. I was simply too much of a coward to articulate it aloud. I loved you, Vanessa. I loved you in the only imperfect way I knew how. I hope, one day, you might find it within yourself to forgive me, but I will comprehend if you cannot. You were always stronger than all of us." I remained seated in my car in the psychiatric facility's parking lot, the letter trembling in my hands, and for the very first time throughout this entire grueling ordeal, through all the betrayals, the startling revelations, and the public humiliations, I succumbed to profound sobs. My tears flowed not from pain or anger or vindication, but from an overwhelming grief. Grief for the mother who had seen me but lacked the courage to acknowledge it, who had loved me but could not express it, who, in her small, timid way, had attempted to make amends, but had waited until death to convey it to me. It was a love that arrived too late to mend anything, an acknowledgement that came only after she was already gone. At the funeral, as we stood by the grave amidst the cold November rain, Ethan drew nearer to me. Emily stood on the opposite side of the casket, isolated and with hollow eyes. When the service concluded and attendees began to disperse, Ethan remained steadfastly by my side. As we made our way back to the cars, he posed a question I had never anticipated hearing. "What now?" His inquiry hung suspended in the air between us, as the rain slicked my mother's grave. It was the very question I had repeatedly asked myself since the settlement, since the television interview, since the precise moment I chose grace over vengeance. What does one do when the conflict has ceased, yet the deep wounds persist? Ethan did not press for an immediate response. He simply stood beside me in the rain, and in that moment, his silent presence felt like an ample answer. 6 months later, Ethan's divorce from Emily was finalized. The process had advanced with surprising simplicity, uncontested and remarkably swift by typical divorce standards. Emily, who had relocated to a small studio apartment and found employment at a boutique clothing store, signed every document without objection or negotiation. Ethan sought nothing beyond his personal possessions and the freedom to move forward. Emily offered no resistance. They met one last time to exchange keys and paper, choosing a coffee shop neither of them would ever need to revisit. "I'm sorry I wasted your time," Emily murmured quietly, avoiding his gaze. Ethan pondered this for a moment, then shook his head. "You didn't waste it. You taught me what I don't want. David once told me, if you ever encounter a woman who can journey into hell and return with a smile, never let her go." He turned to fully face me, and in his eyes I perceived something entirely new, something akin to absolute certainty. "You ventured into hell twice. Once in Afghanistan for strangers you would never meet, whom you saved without knowing their names or their stories. And then, once within your own family, for the truth, for justice, for the father who tried, albeit too late, to make things right." He reached for my hand. "I don't want to let you go. This isn't my grandmother's ring. That was Emily's, and it's gone now. This is new. I selected it specifically for you. Marry me, Vanessa. Not because I owe you for saving David. Not because we have endured hell together. Marry me because I cannot envision my life without you. Because you are the strongest person I have ever encountered, and I yearn to be strong alongside you." "Yes," I replied, and Ethan stood, embracing me in a kiss, witnessed by my father's grave. 6 months subsequently, we were married in a small, intimate ceremony at the military chapel on the very base where I had undergone my initial training. The edifice resonated with memories of the person I had been when I first donned the uniform, when I first discovered a sphere that valued me for my capabilities, rather than for what I could sacrifice for others. Ethan and I both wore our dress uniforms, his navy whites and my army blues, and the ceremony remained simple and heartfelt, devoid of pretense or theatricality. The guest list was exceedingly select. Fellow veterans who truly understood the meaning of service, and a few close friends who had steadfastly supported me through the attendant scandal. Ethan's parents had approached me before our ceremony, a picture of remorse. They wished to apologize for falling prey to Emily's deceptions, for threatening me with legal action, and for their inability to discern the truth until it became glaringly obvious. I accepted their apology, understanding that harboring resentment would only poison my own future, and I had endured enough toxicity in my lifetime. In the last row, barely visible, sat Emily. She had asked Ethan if she could attend, and he had deferred the decision to me. I agreed, not out of complete forgiveness, but because she was my sister, and this felt like an event she ought to witness. She wore a simple dress, devoid of makeup, her hair neatly pulled back. She made no attempt to draw attention, content to observe silently as Ethan and I exchanged our vows. After the ceremony, amidst the celebratory chatter and congratulations from guests, Emily tentatively approached. She initially remained silent, simply extending a small, wrapped package. Inside, I discovered a framed photograph I had never seen, likely from my mother's possessions. It captured Emily and me as children, perhaps 8 and 4 years old respectively. Our arms were entwined, both of us grinning at the camera with the uninhibited joy of children who had yet to learn about competition. On the back, in Emily's handwriting, were words that tightened my throat. "I forgot this version of us existed. I'm trying to find my way back." I gazed at my sister, the woman who had caused so much despair, but was now slowly, painfully striving to rebuild. I pulled her into a brief, gentle embrace. Take your time, I whispered.
It wasn't full forgiveness, not yet.
But it was an acknowledgement that a path to reconciliation was open, should she choose to walk it. Our story might have concluded there, but fate had yet another flight planned for me. That journey began precisely 1 year after our wedding, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, transformed into something extraordinary when my phone rang, displaying a familiar area code. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez, my former commanding officer from my Afghanistan deployment, wasted no time on pleasantries. Vanessa, we've got a Category 4 hurricane making landfall on the Carolina coast in 6 hours. The National Guard is overwhelmed. We're activating the Civilian Rescue Pilot Network. Are you available? I didn't hesitate. For the past year, I had been flying medical transports, a stable and fulfilling job that kept me airborne without the stress of combat. Yet, a part of me had been anticipating this very call, waiting for the moment when I would be needed for something as profoundly important as my military service once was. Ethan was already packing his gear when I arrived home. His SEAL team had received deployment orders for water rescue operations in the same affected region. We moved around each other with the practiced efficiency of 2 individuals who intuitively understood each other's needs without speaking, checking equipment, reviewing maps, and formulating contingency plans. Before we departed, he drew me close, kissing me with an intensity that acknowledged what we both knew. This endeavour was perilous. The conditions would be brutal, and there were no guarantees we would both return home. "Fly safe, Iron Widow," he whispered against my hair. I touched the small tattoo on my wrist, a simple helicopter silhouette with his brother David's initials beneath it, which I had gotten after our wedding. "You too, Frogman." As I drove toward the airfield where the civilian rescue operation was being coordinated, my thoughts turned to my call sign, to the name I had carried for so many years with a mix of pride and exhaustion. Iron Widow, a moniker derived from the black widows painted on my helmet, earned from my reputation for flying missions no one else would undertake, for being the pilot who brought people home from impossible situations. For years after leaving active duty, I had striven to distance myself from that identity, to simply be Vanessa, a woman attempting to build a normal life. But sitting in my truck, driving toward yet another storm, I realized I had been evading the wrong thing. Iron Widow was not a burden. It was who I had always been, who I was meant to be. I was embracing it now, flying toward danger rather than away from it, answering the call because this was, unequivocally, what I did. I was going through my pre-flight checklist with my co-pilot Marcus, a former Army aviator 10 years my junior, who was visibly anxious about the impending conditions, when my phone rang again. Emily's name on the screen sent a jolt through me. Our relationship had been slowly mending over the past year, marked by cautious conversations and occasional coffee meetings. But she never called unless something was gravely wrong. "Vanessa!" Her voice was high-pitched and panicked, barely coherent through her sobs. "I'm at a shelter in Brunswick. I've been volunteering here, helping with evacuations, trying to—" She cleared her throat. "It doesn't matter. The shelter's flooding, the water's coming in faster than they predicted, and we can't evacuate everyone. I'm on the 2nd floor with 6 kids whose parents got separated during the chaos, and we can't reach them. And official rescue is saying they're prioritizing hospitals." She broke down completely, and I could hear children crying in the background. "Emily, listen to me," I said, my voice automatically shifting into the calm, commanding tone I reserved for emergencies. "Get everyone to the roof right now. Bring water, blanket, anything you can carry. I'm coming to get you." "You can't," she sobbed. "The conditions are... They said civilian aircraft shouldn't..." "I'm coming," I repeated. "Get to the roof. I'll be there in 40 minutes. I immediately contacted Ethan on the emergency channel. He was already in the area with his team, coordinating water rescues from a staging point 10 miles from Emily's location. When I explained the situation, there was no hesitation, no debate about the risks, he stated. The takeoff was rough, the wind already picking up as the hurricane's outer bands reached land. Marcus gripped his armrest, his face pale, but he ran through the checklist with professional diligence despite his fear. As we flew into the storm, conditions deteriorated rapidly. Wind shears threatened to slam us into the ground or flip us upside down. Visibility plummeted to near zero as rain hammered the windscreen. Debris, pieces of roofs and trees and signs flew through the air, capable of tearing through our rotors if we weren't careful. Marcus's breathing became fast and shallow, panic setting in as he grasped the severity of the situation. I said, maintaining a steady, calm voice, the same voice I had used in Afghanistan while flying through tracer fire. "We've done this before. We'll do it again. Watch your instruments. Call out obstacles. Trust the bird. She'll get us there. Thank you." As I observed the devastation below, the lives saved, the homes lost, the fragile line between life and death, I finally understood my father's words. My father, in his recordings, in his final attempts to make things right, had tried to convey that life wasn't about being invisible or being seen. It was about the choices you made when everything was crumbling, about who you chose to save when you could barely save yourself. I comprehended that now, with 7 lives depending on me to bring this helicopter back to safety through conditions that were deteriorating with every second. We had just cleared the flooded shelter, gaining altitude and turning toward the staging area, when a warning light on my instrument panel flashed red. Engine temperature critical. Oil pressure dropping. I felt the shudder run through the aircraft before the alarm began screaming, that sickening vibration indicating that something had gone catastrophically wrong. Debris ingestion, most likely a piece of roof or a tree branch, had been sucked into the engine during our hover, and now we were flying on borrowed time and failing machinery. Marcus, his professional calm shattered, also witnessed it. "We're going down," he stammered, his voice escalating into near panic. "We need emergency protocols." I cut him off. My own voice, surprisingly level and calm, despite the cascade of options racing through my mind, reached for the radio. "Ethan, we have a problem. Engine failure. We won't make it back to staging." I tried to maintain an even tone, but he knew me too well, sensing the fear I desperately tried to conceal, and the grim calculations I ran through, each scenario concluding in disaster. The helicopter shuddered again, more violently this time, and I felt our altitude plummeting. The engine was failing, leaving us with perhaps 90 seconds before its complete demise. Through the relentless pouring rain, I could discern the staging area, a distant 3 miles away, utterly unattainable. Below us, nothing but churning brown floodwater, dotted with debris that would tear us apart if we attempted a landing. 7 souls sat behind me, including 6 children and my sister, and I had mere seconds to make a life-or-death decision. Then I spotted it. A clearing, barely visible through the tempest, appearing to be a raised parking lot or a warehouse roof, something solid piercing the flood. It was small, perhaps 60 feet across, and attempting an auto-rotation landing there during a hurricane was madness. Yet, it was the sole option that didn't guarantee our drowning in the flood or being smashed by debris. "Marcus, we're going down there," I declared, pointing. "Auto-rotation protocol. Call it out for me." "That's impossible," he breathed, but his training began to supersede his panic. He started reciting airspeed and altitude, his voice trembling but functional, while I grappled with the controls. Auto-rotation is a controlled descent, leveraging the upward rush of air through the rotors to decelerate our fall when the engine fails. I had practiced it countless times in training, under perfect weather, with instructors observing and ample room for error. Never in a hurricane, never with lives hanging on my precise execution. The helicopter plummeted like a stone, caught in a tempest of wind shear and rain. I instinctively adjusted the pitch and collective, feeling more than seeing the correct angle of descent, the right speed, relying on years of muscle memory and experience. Behind me, the children screamed. Emily sobbed. The cleared area surged towards us through the rain, and I pulled the collective at the very last second, bleeding off speed, and we hit. The impact was brutal, throwing me forward against my harness with enough force to crack ribs. The helicopter skidded sideways, metal screeching against concrete. Then, water poured in through seams and emergency exits as the floodwaters surged around us. We had survived the crash. Now, we had to survive the flood. My training kicked in, overriding fear and pain, reducing everything to simple, sequential tasks. "Emergency exits, now!" I yelled to Marcus. We forced the side doors open and began pulling people out, the children first, passing them to Marcus, who stood in waist-deep water on what proved to be a grocery store roof. Then Emily, moving as if in a trance, her eyes unfocused with shock. I was the last to exit, pulling myself through the opening just as the cockpit completely filled, the helicopter settling deeper into the flood. We clung to the aircraft's hull as the storm raged around us, 7 people grasping metal in the heart of a hurricane. I reflected on all the times I had flown into impossible situations and somehow emerged. This felt different. This felt like I had finally pushed my luck too far. But then I heard it, the distinct sound of an outboard motor cutting through the wind and rain. Ethan's team, racing towards our last known position, emerged from the storm like spectres. The next few minutes were pandemonium. SEALs pulled children into boats, wrapping them in thermal blankets, conducting rapid medical assessments. Emily was lifted, unresponsive, her eyes open but vacant. Marcus tirelessly assisted with coordination, his panic transformed into action. Finally, Ethan reached for me, pulling me into the boat, and I collapsed against him, my strength utterly depleted. I whispered into his chest, shaking so violently I could barely speak. Quote 1. He held me tight, one hand stroking my wet hair, and I felt his own fear in the intensity of his grip. He murmured. Hours later, after we were evacuated to a makeshift hospital in a high school gymnasium, after the children had been reunited with frantic parents, and Marcus had been treated for hypothermia, and I'd been informed of my 2 cracked ribs and concussion, I found Emily. She sat on a cot, wrapped in an emergency blanket, her hair still damp, her eyes still holding that shell-shocked emptiness. I sat beside her in silence for a long time. We were 2 sisters who had journeyed through hell in different directions, yet somehow ended up in the same place. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice hoarse from screaming during the crash. "You've saved me twice now. Once from that helicopter, and once from myself." I pondered that, pondering the Emily I had raised as a child, the Emily who had shattered our father's final wishes, and the Emily who had volunteered at a shelter, striving to become a better person. I finally said. Emily turned to me, tears streaming down her face. I considered the question, reflecting on everything we had endured, all the pain, the betrayal, and the slow, arduous healing. I replied. She nodded, wiping her face with trembling hands, and we sat together, watching the sunrise through the gymnasium windows. The storm had passed, leaving devastation in its wake. But also this, another day, another chance, another sunrise that I had delivered by flying into hell and bringing people home. For once, I didn't need to fly to feel free. Freedom, I learned, wasn't about distance or altitude or escaping the past. It was about choosing who you became after the fire, about what you built from the ashes. 2 years after the hurricane rescue, when a documentary crew reached out asking to tell my story, my first instinct was to refuse. I had spent my life being invisible, then too visible, and I desired neither extreme anymore. But the director, a former Marine named Jessica Chen, convinced me during our initial phone call. "This isn't about making you famous," she stated. "It's about showing every woman who sacrificed in silence that they mattered." I agreed, but on one condition. The documentary wouldn't center on me. It would be about all the invisible women who gave everything without recognition, without acknowledgement, without even the expectation that anyone would notice. Iron Widow, the woman who flew into hell, took 8 months to film. Jessica interviewed soldiers I had saved, including some I had never met, men and women who had been evacuated from combat zones or disaster areas, and gone on to build lives because I had been willing to fly when no one else would. Ethan sat for hours, sharing stories about his brother David, showing Jessica the journal entry about the pilot with the calm voice who had come for them when hope was gone. The documentary covered my military service, but it also delved into the family betrayal, the stolen inheritance, and my father's desperate attempt to make things right. Jessica didn't shy away from the ugliness, from Emily's crimes and my mother's complicity, but she also avoided exploiting it. The most surprising interview came from Emily herself. She had called me before agreeing to participate, nervous about my reaction. I told her the truth. It was her story too, and she had every right to tell it. Emily spoke candidly about jealousy, about the cost of being valued only for her beauty, about the redemption she was still working towards daily. She said directly to the camera, "The film premiered at a small festival and became an unexpected success, sparking national conversations about family dynamics, women in the military, and the true meaning of forgiveness." The documentary also inspired something more tangible. Using the settlement money from my father's estate and the donations that flooded in after the film's release, I established the Iron Widow Foundation. It was a non-profit dedicated to supporting female veterans transitioning to civilian life, focusing on the very things I had needed when I left service: mental health support, career placement assistance, and family reconciliation services for women whose families struggled to understand their sacrifices. Ethan immediately joined the board, leveraging his military connections to secure partnerships with the VA and active duty support networks. Emily, who had spent the past 2 years training as a counselor for at-risk youth, volunteered weekly, leading workshops on overcoming toxic family patterns and breaking cycles of favoritism and resentment. I chose the foundation's motto myself: "No one flies alone." It represented everything I had learned, everything I wished someone had told me when I was 20, and joining the military to escape a family that couldn't truly see me. Within 18 months, we had helped over 300 female veterans. Within 2 years, we had become one of the fastest-growing veteran support organizations in the country, with chapters in 15 states and partnerships with major employers eager to hire women with military experience. Each year, marking the anniversary of the hurricane rescue, we convened a commemorative event at the Foundation's headquarters, a refurbished hangar that suitably housed an organization initiated by a pilot. Veterans attended with their loved ones, while supporters gathered to honor their service. The evening was dedicated to recounting tales of unseen sacrifices and the individuals who made them. At the 3rd annual observance, I witnessed the hall fill with hundreds, far more than anticipated, and a profound emotion enveloped me. My life had been a quest for reassurance that my efforts mattered, that the girl, overlooked within her own family, had indeed become a visible force, helping others. That year, the keynote speaker emerged from an unexpected quarter. Maya Torres, then 11 years old, had been 4 when Emily cradled her on that inundated rooftop during the hurricane. She approached the microphone in a dress her mother had helped her select, articulating with clarity about the pilot who had rescued them. She spoke of her terror and cold, her conviction they would perish, only to hear helicopter blades cleaving the storm. "Miss Vanessa flew into the worst day of my life and brought us all home," Maya stated, her voice unwavering despite her youth. "She crashed her helicopter to save us, and she didn't even know our names. That's what heroes do." Stepping away, she walked directly to me, front row, and rendered a small salute. Tears streamed down my face as I returned the gesture, and the entire room rose, erupting in applause. Emily, standing in the audience beside Ethan, approached me after the ceremony concluded, After I had embraced Maya and commended her bravery, Emily took my hand. "Dad would be so proud," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I gazed at my sister, at the woman she had become through years of tireless effort and genuine transformation, and responded, "He'd be proud of both of us." For the first time since discovering his hidden box of secrets and recordings, I truly believed this. He would have been proud to see us united, constructing something significant from the rubble of our family's dysfunction. Yet, even heroes must eventually bid farewell. That farewell arrived a decade later, though not as anyone had foretold. I was 48 when Sarah Chen, the journalist who initially chronicled the wedding salute that sparked everything, requested a final interview for her documentary's 10th anniversary edition. We met in my office at the Foundation's headquarters, surrounded by photographs of veterans we had assisted, and letters from families expressing gratitude for bringing their daughters, sisters, and mothers home, through means entirely unrelated to helicopters. Sarah asked me to reflect on the entirety of what had transpired, the full trajectory, from an invisible daughter to a viral sensation, a family destroyer, and then a reluctant hero. I deliberated carefully before responding, aware that my words would shape how this narrative would be remembered. "People believe my story is about revenge or justice," I eventually said. "But it's not. It's about learning that your worth isn't determined by whether others acknowledge you. You must first acknowledge yourself. Everything else flows from that." I spoke to Sarah about Emily, relating how she was now flourishing in ways I could never have envisioned during those grim days of conflict and resolution. She had remarried 3 years prior to a kind man, a teacher, who loved her for who she was, not merely for her appearance. They had 2 daughters, aged 5 and 3, and Emily was resolute in raising them differently than we were raised. To love them equally and empower both to shine, she remained in therapy, still processing decades of damage. But she was genuinely content, a happiness I had never before witnessed in her. She had to lose everything to discover herself, I mused. Sometimes grace is the most difficult thing to offer, and the most essential, but it is also the only true path to healing. Sarah inquired if I still flew, and I offered a smile, a response I granted more frequently as I aged. I admitted I had retired from active flying 2 years ago, following a minor health concern. Nothing grave, but sufficient to remind me that I was no longer 25, and that reaction times were paramount in aviation. However, I consistently mentored young pilots through the Foundation, spending hours in simulators with women who mirrored my younger self, teaching them not only how to pilot, but also how to trust themselves when chaos reigned. Flying was never solely about being airborne, I expounded. It was about understanding that even when everything unravels, you can still chart a course home. That's a skill you carry, whether inside a cockpit or not. I presented Sarah with the advanced copies of my book, resting on my desk, a project I had dedicated 3 years to writing and revising. Iron and Grace, Finding Strength and Forgiveness, was not a memoir. I had consciously refrained from narrating my own story, opting instead to craft a guide for women navigating familial trauma, offering the tools and perspective I wished someone had given me. The dedication page simply read, "To Emily, who taught me that enemies can become sisters again." She had wept upon seeing it, the kind of beneficial tears that signify healing rather than anguish. After the interview concluded, Sarah's camera crew trailed me as I exited the edifice and drove to the modest airfield where I spent most of my leisure time. It was a clear afternoon, the sort of ideal flying weather that, despite my retirement, still stirred an ache of longing within my heart. One of my mentees, Jordan, a 23-year-old former Air Force pilot, was practicing takeoffs and landings. Her movements were smooth and confident as she repeatedly brought her aircraft down, cultivating the muscle memory that would someday safeguard her life. Ethan joined me by the fence, his hair now grey, yet his presence remained steadfast and reassuring beside me. We held hands in comfortable silence, observing Jordan's work, and my gaze drifted skyward, recalling everything: Afghanistan and the 6 figures in the dry riverbed, the hurricane and Emily on the flooded rooftop, children clinging to her. Every mission where I had flown into darkness, trusting that I would find light on the other side, that I would bring everyone home, including myself. Jordan executed a flawless landing, her wheels kissing the runway with barely a bounce, and I applauded. She taxied over, waving from the cockpit, her grin radiating the pure joy of someone who had just accomplished something challenging and done it well. Ethan turned to me, posing a question I had often asked myself. Miss it? I pondered this honestly, examining whether the ache I felt watching Jordan fly was regret, nostalgia, or something entirely different. Then I shook my head. No, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The camera captured me gazing at the horizon, at peace in a way that had required decades to achieve. I was no longer the invisible daughter, the forgotten sister, iron widow, or any other identity bestowed upon me by others. I was simply myself at last, and that was enough. They called me Iron Widow, but I was never made of iron. I was made of grace, and somewhere above the clouds, I know they are all waiting for me. My father, David, and everyone I ever brought home. But not yet. Not yet. Thus concludes the narrative of Vanessa, the woman known as Iron Widow. From an invisible daughter, overlooked by her own family, to a courageous military pilot who ventured into hell to rescue strangers, to a woman who endured betrayal from those she loved most and chose grace over vengeance. Her journey serves as a powerful reminder that true strength doesn't reside in being, quote, zero, but rather in possessing the courage to forgive, the wisdom to recognize your own worth, and the grace to assist others, even when you received no help yourself. Vanessa's story illustrates that familial wounds can indeed heal, that redemption is attainable, and that sometimes the most valiant act is to choose mercy when every right exists to choose retribution. If this story resonated deeply with you, if Vanessa's journey connected with your own struggles with family, forgiveness, or discovering your self-worth, we invite you to subscribe and become a part of our community. Each week we share equally powerful true stories that inspire, challenge, and underscore the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Please leave a comment below and share your reflections. Do you believe Vanessa made the right decision in forgiving Emily? Would you have acted similarly? Have you ever had to choose between justice and mercy in your own life? Share your thoughts and let's engage in a meaningful dialogue. Your story is significant, and this community is here to listen earnestly. Thank you for watching, and remember, no one flies alone.